Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. The Red Shoes. There was once a little girl who was very pretty and delicate, but in summer she was forced to run about with bare feet. She was so poor, and in winter wear very large wooden shoes, which made her little insteps quite red, and that looked so dangerous. In the middle of the village lived old Dame Shoemaker. She sat and sewed together as well as she could a little pair of shoes out of old red strips of cloth. They were very clumsy, but it was a kind thought. They were meant for the little girl. The little girl was called Karen. On the very day her mother was buried, Karen received the red shoes and wore them for the first time. They were certainly not intended for mourning, but she had no others, and with stockingless feet she followed the poor straw coffin in them. Suddenly, a large old carriage drove up, and a large old lady sat in it. She looked at the little girl, felt compassion for her, and then said to the clergyman, "Here, give me the little girl. I will adopt her." And Karen believed all this happened on account of the red shoes, but the old lady thought they were horrible, and they were burnt. But Karen herself was cleanly and nicely dressed. She must learn to read and sew, and people said she was a nice little thing. But the looking-glass said, "Thou art more than nice, thou art beautiful." Now the queen once traveled through the land, and she had her little daughter with her. And this little daughter was a princess, and people streamed to the castle, and Karen was there also. And the little princess stood in her fine white dress in a window and let herself be stared at. She had neither a train nor a golden crown, but splendid red Morocco shoes. They were certainly far handsomer than those Dame Shoemaker had made for little Karen. Nothing in the world can be compared with red shoes. Now Karen was old enough to be confirmed. She had new clothes and was to have new shoes also. The rich shoemaker in the city took the measure of her little foot. This took place at his house, in his room, where stood large glass cases filled with elegant shoes and brilliant boots. All this looked charming, but the old lady could not see well, and so had no pleasure in them. In the midst of the shoes stood a pair of red ones, just like those the princess had worn. How beautiful they were! The shoemaker said also they had been made for the child of a count, but had not fitted. "That must be patent leather," said the old lady. "They shine so." "Yes, they shine," said Karen, "and they fitted and were bought." But the old lady knew nothing about their being red, else she would never have allowed Karen to have gone in red shoes to be confirmed. Yet such was the case. Everybody looked at her feet, and when she stepped through the chancel door on the church pavement, it seemed to her as if the old figures on the tombs, those portraits of old preachers and preachers' wives with stiff ruffs and long black dresses, fixed their eyes on her red shoes. And she thought only of them as the clergyman laid his hand upon her head and spoke of the holy baptism, of the covenant with God, and how she should be now a matured Christian. And the organ pealed so solemnly The sweet children's voices sang, and the old music directors sang, but Karen only thought of her red shoes. In the afternoon, the old lady heard from everyone that the shoes had been red, and she said that it was very wrong of Karen, that it was not at all becoming, and that in future Karen should only go in black shoes to church, even when she should be older. The next Sunday there was the sacrament, and Karen looked at the black shoes, looked at the red ones, looked at them again, and put on the red shoes. The sun shone gloriously. Karen and the old lady walked along the path through the corn. It was rather dusty there. At the church door stood an old soldier with a crutch and with a wonderfully long beard, which was more red than white, and he bowed to the ground and asked the old lady whether he might dust her shoes. And Karen stretched out her little foot. "See, what beautiful dancing shoes," said the soldier. "Sit firm when you dance." And he put his hand out towards the soles. And the old lady gave the old soldier alms and went into the church with Karen. And all the people in the church looked at Karen's red shoes and all the pictures, and as Karen knelt before the altar and raised the cup to her lips, she only thought of the red shoes, and they seemed to swim in it, and she forgot to sing her psalm, and she forgot to pray. Our Father in heaven. Now all the people went out of church, and the old lady got into her carriage. Karen raised her foot to get in after her, when the old soldier said, "Look, what beautiful dancing shoes." And Karen could not help dancing a step or two, and when she began, her feet continued to dance. It was just as though the shoes had power over them. She danced round the church corner. She could not leave off. The coachman was obliged to run after and catch hold of her, and he lifted her in the carriage, but her feet continued to dance so that she trod on the old lady dreadfully. At length she took the shoes off, and then her legs had peace. The shoes were placed in a closet at home, but Karen could not avoid looking at them. Now the old lady was sick, and it was said she could not recover. She must be nursed and waited upon, and there was no one whose duty it was so much as Karen's. But there was a great ball in the city, to which Karen was invited. She looked at the old lady, who could not recover. She looked at the red shoes, and she thought there could be no sin in it. She put on the red shoes. She might do that also, she thought. But then she went to the ball and began to dance. When she wanted to dance to the right, the shoes would dance to the left. And when she wanted to dance up the room, the shoes danced back again, down the steps, into the street, and out of the city gate. She danced, and was forced to dance straight out into the gloomy wood. Then it was suddenly light up among the trees, and she fancied it must be the moon, for there was a face, but it was the old soldier with the red beard. He sat there, nodded his head, and said, "Look, what beautiful dancing shoes." Then she was terrified, and wanted to fling off the red shoes, but they clung fast, and she pulled down her stockings, but the shoes seemed to have grown to her feet. And she danced, and must dance, over fields and meadows, in rain and sunshine, by night and day. But at night it was the most fearful. She danced over the churchyard, but the dead did not dance. They had something better to do than to dance. She wished to seat herself on a poor man's grave, where the bitter tansy grew. But for her there was neither peace nor rest. And when she danced towards the open church door, she saw an angel standing there. He wore long white garments. He had wings which reached from his shoulders to the earth. His countenance was severe and grave, and in his hand he held a sword, broad and glittering. "Dance shalt thou," said he. "Dance in thy red shoes till thou art pale and cold, till thy skin shrivels up and thou art a skeleton. Dance shalt thou from door to door, and where proud, vain children dwell, thou shalt knock, that they may hear thee and tremble. Dance shalt thou." "Mercy," cried Karen. But she did not hear the angel's reply, for the shoes carried her through the gate into the fields, across roads and bridges, and she must keep ever dancing. One morning she danced past a door which she well knew. Within sounded a psalm. A coffin decked with flowers was borne forth. Then she knew that the old lady was dead, and felt that she was abandoned by all, and condemned by the angel of God. She danced, and she was forced to dance through the gloomy night. The shoes carried her over stack and stone. She was torn till she bled. She danced over the heath till she came to a little house. Here, she knew, dwelt the executioner, and she tapped with her fingers at the window and said, "Come out, come out. I cannot come in, for I am forced to dance." And the executioner said, "Thou dost not know who I am, I fancy. I strike bad people's heads off, and I hear that my axe rings." "Don't strike my head off," said Karen. "Then I can't repent of my sins, but strike off my feet in the red shoes." And then she confessed her entire sin, and the executioner struck off her feet with the red shoes. But the shoes danced away with the little feet across the field into the deep wood. And he carved out little wooden feet for her, and crutches, taught her the psalm criminals always sing. And she kissed the hand which had wielded the axe, and went over the heath. "Now I have suffered enough for the red shoes," said she. "Now I will go into the church that people may see me." And she hastened towards the church door. But when she was near it, the red shoes danced before her, and she was terrified and turned round. The whole week she was unhappy, and wept many bitter tears. But when Sunday returned, she said, "Well, now I have suffered and struggled enough. I really believe I am as good as many a one who sits in the church and holds her head so high." And away she went boldly, but she had not got farther than the churchyard gate before she saw the red shoes dancing before her, and she was frightened and turned back and repented of her sin from her heart. And she went to the parsonage and begged that they would take her into service. She would be very industrious, she said, and would do everything she could. She did not care about the wages, only she wished to have a home and be with good people. And the clergyman's wife was sorry for her and took her into service, and she was industrious and thoughtful. She sat still and listened when the clergyman read the Bible in the evenings. All the children thought a great deal of her, but when they spoke of dress and grandeur and beauty, she shook her head. The following Sunday, when the family was going to church, they asked her whether she would not go with them, but she glanced sorrowfully, with tears in her eyes at her crutches. The family went to hear the word of God, but she went alone into her little chamber. There was only room for a bed and chair to stand in it, and here she sat down with her prayer book, and whilst she read with a pious mind, the wind bore the strains of the organ towards her, and she raised her tearful countenance and said, "O God, help me." And the sun shone so clearly, and straight before her stood the angel of God in white garments, the same she had seen that night at the church door. But he no longer carried the sharp sword, but in its stead a splendid green spray, full of roses. And he touched the ceiling with the spray, and the ceiling rose so high, and where he had touched it, there gleamed a golden star. And he touched the walls, and they widened out, and she saw the organ which was playing. She saw the old pictures of the preachers and the preachers' wives. The congregation sat in cushioned seats and sang out of their prayer books. For the church itself had come to the poor girl in her narrow chamber, or else she had come into the church. She sat in the pew with the clergyman's family, and when they had ended the psalm and looked up, they nodded and said, "It is right that thou art come." "It was through mercy," she said, and the organ pealed, and the children's voices in the choir sounded so sweet and soft. The clear sunshine streamed so warmly through the window into the pew where Karen sat. Her heart was so full of sunshine, peace, and joy that it broke. Her soul flew on the sunshine to God, and there no one asked after the red shoes. On Judgment Day, the most solemn of all the days of our life is the day we die. It is Judgment Day, the great sacred day of transfiguration. Have you really seriously given a fleeting thought to that grave and mighty last hour we shall spend on earth? There was once a man, a stanch upholder of truth, as he was called, to whom the word of his God was law, a zealous servant of his zealous God. With a stern but heavenly look, the angel of death stood at his bedside. "The hour has come, you shall follow me," said Death, and touched the man's feet with ice-cold fingers, and his feet became like ice. Then Death touched his forehead, and lastly his heart, and when it burst, the soul was free to follow the angel of death. But during those brief seconds, while the icy touch shivered through feet and head and heart, there passed through the mind of the dying man, like great ocean waves, the recollection of all he had wrought and felt throughout his life. So does one terrified glance into a whirlpool, reveal in thought as swift as lightning the whole unfathomable depth of it. So with one fleeting glance at the countless stars of heaven, can one conceive the infinite multitude of worlds and spheres in the great universe. In such a moment, the terrified sinner shrinks into himself and has nothing to cling to, and he feels himself shrinking further into infinite emptiness. And at such times the devout soul bows its head to the Almighty and yields itself up to Him in childlike trust, praying, "Thy will be done with me." But this dying man had not the mind of a child, nor was he a terrified sinner. His thoughts were of self-praise. He knew that he had abided by religious traditions. Millions, he knew, would have to face judgment. But he believed most confidently that his path would lead straight heavenward, and that mercy, promised to all men, would open the gates to him. And the soul followed the angel of death, casting only one wistful glance back at the bed where in its white shroud lay the lifeless image of clay, still bearing the print of the soul's individuality. Now they hovered through the air, now glided along the ground. Were they passing through a vast, decorated hall, or perchance a forest? It was hard to tell. Nature appeared formally set out for show, as in the stately, artificial, old French gardens, and through its strange, carefully arranged scenes there passed many men and women, all clad as if for a masquerade. "Such is human life," spoke the angel of death. It seemed as if the figures tried to disguise themselves. Those who flaunted the glories of velvet and gold were not always the noblest and the richest. Neither were all those who wore the garb of poverty the most wretched and vulgar. A strange masquerade indeed. And most strange of all was to see how each one carefully concealed under his clothing something he would not have the others discover. Each was determined to learn his neighbor's secret, and they tore at one another until here and there the heads of different animals were bared. One was that of a grinning ape, another the head of a goat, still others a clammy snake and a feeble fish. In all was some token of the animal which is fast rooted in human nature, and which here was struggling and jumping to burst forth. And however closely a person might hold his garment over it to hide it, the others would never rest until they had torn aside the veil, and all kept crying out, "Look here, see, it is he, it is she," and everyone mockingly laid bare his fellow's shame. "Then what was the animal in me?" inquired the soul. The angel of death silently pointed to a haughty form around whose head spread a bright glory of rays, with shining colors, but in whose heart could be seen lurking, half hidden, the feet of a peacock. The spreading glory above was merely the speckled tail of the peacock. As they passed on, huge birds shrieked horribly at them from the boughs of trees. In voices harsh but clear, intelligible, and human, they cried, "You who walk with death, do you remember me?" All the evil thoughts and lusts that had lurked within the man from birth to death now called after him in forbidding tones, "Do you remember me?" For a moment the soul shuddered, for it recognized the voices. It could not deny knowledge of the evil thoughts and desires that were now rising as witnesses against it. "In our flesh, in our evil nature, nothing good lives," said the soul. "But at least with me, thoughts never turned into action. The world has not seen their evil fruit." The soul rushed on to escape the ugly screams, but the huge black birds swept in circles, screaming out their vicious words louder and louder, as though they wished to be heard to the ends of the world. The soul fled like a hunted stag, and at every step stumbled against sharp flint stones, painfully cutting his feet on them. How came these sharp stones here? They seem like mere withered leaves lying on the ground. Each stone is some careless word you have spoken, which wounded your neighbor's heart far more deeply than these sharp flints that now hurt your feet. "I never thought of that," cried the soul. "Judge not, that ye be not judged," rang through the air. In a moment the soul recovered from its self-abasement. "We have all sinned, but I have kept the law and the gospel. I have done what I could do. I am not like the others." And then he stood at the gates of heaven itself, and the angel who guarded the entrance asked, "Who are you? Tell me your faith, and show it to me in your works." "I have faithfully kept all the commandments," replied the soul proudly. "I have humbled myself in the eyes of the world. I have hated and persecuted evil and those who practice it, and I would do so still, with fire and sword, had I yet the power." "Then you are a follower of Mohammed?" said the angel. "I? Never. Zom. He who strikes with the sword shall perish by the sword. Thus spoke the Son. His religion you do not have. Are you then perchance one of the children of Israel, who with Moses said, 'An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth'? I am a Christian. I see it neither in your faith nor in your actions. The teaching of Christ is forgiveness, love, and mercy. Mercy. The echo of this rang through infinite space. The gates of heaven opened, and the soul hovered toward the realms of eternal bliss. But the flood of light that streamed forth from within was so dazzling, so penetrating, that the soul shrank back as from a double-edged sword. And the sound of music was so soft and touching that no mortal tongue could describe it. The soul trembled and prostrated itself lower and lower, and the celestial light cut through it until it felt, as it had never felt before, the weight of its own pride and cruelty and sin. Whatever good I have done in the world, I did because I could not do otherwise. But the evil that I did, that was of myself. And more the soul was dazzled and overwhelmed by the pure light of heaven. It seemed falling into a bottomless abyss, the abyss of its own nakedness and unworthiness. Shrunk into itself, humbled, cast out, unfit for the kingdom of heaven, trembling at the thought of the just and holy God, hardly dared it to gasp, "Mercy." And the angel of mercy came to him, the mercy he had not expected, and in the infinite space of heaven, God's everlasting love filled the soul. "Holy, loving, glorious forever shalt thou be, O erring human spirit," sang the chorus of angels. And as this soul did, so shall we all, on our last day on earth, humbly tremble in the glorious sight of the kingdom of heaven. But the infinite love and mercy of our Heavenly Father will carry us through other spheres, so that, purified and strengthened, we may ascend into God's eternal light. The rags. Outside the great paper mill, the air smelled faintly of dust, ink, and the memory of words yet unborn. In long, uneven hills lay enormous stacks of rags, mountains of fabric once belonging to the living world. There were remnants of tablecloths from wedding feasts, curtains from forgotten parlors, shirts that had embraced the warmth of men and women now turned to dust, and handkerchiefs that had soaked up both laughter and tears. They came from every corner of the land, from ships, cottages, palaces, and hospitals alike. Each rag had its own tale to whisper, its own thread of destiny. If one had the ears of imagination, one could almost hear them murmuring together when the wind passed through the heaps. An orchestra of faded voices, each telling of its brief moment in the great play of life. But no one could possibly listen to all their stories. Even the mill itself seemed weary of so many memories. Near the edge of the yard, two rags found themselves side by side. One Danish, the other Norwegian. The Danish rag was a soft, well-worn linen, once a scholar's shirt. The Norwegian, rougher and sturdier, had served as a fisherman's sailcloth. Though their threads were frayed and their colors faded, both still carried a sense of pride. For even a rag can remember what it once was. "Ah," said the Norwegian, rustling with a brisk northern confidence. "I am Norse, firm of fiber, bred from the mountains and the sea spray. You can feel the granite in my weave. We Norwegians speak straight and free as the wind howls through our fjords. Our tongue is as pure and cold as the springs that burst from the glacier's heart." The Danish rag chuckled softly, its texture smooth as if worn by centuries of polite conversation. "And we Danes," it said with gentle irony, "we have literature, poetry, philosophy, a little wit, and perhaps even a touch of melancholy. We may not shout from mountaintops, but our words ripple like calm waters, deep and steady." "Literature," scoffed the Norwegian, "empty chatter from the lowlands. When your sun melts our snows, your barges creep up to us with cheese and butter, good enough things to eat. But they also bring that literature of yours as ballast. Keep it. We have our own voice, loud and free. You don't need to drink from another's stale beer when your own mountain spring runs fresh." The Danish rag smiled again, refusing to take offense. "Perhaps," it said, "but there is beauty even in modest words. We Danes don't boast. We endure quietly, with patience. We envy no one. We speak well of everyone. And though the world may overlook us, we know our worth. Silently, politely, without fuss, I find it rather becoming. The Norwegian rag flapped indignantly in a gust of wind. Your softness makes me ill, you lowland cloth, a rag without rock or storm. You think too small and talk too sweetly. Bah! And with that, the northern wind, always eager to side with its own kind, lifted the Norwegian rag and carried it fluttering to another heap, where it might rest among coarser company. Time passed. Rain came and went, soaking the heaps until they smelled of earth and memory. Then, one day the rags were gathered up and carried inside the mill. The great machines roared and churned, tearing, washing, grinding, until no thread remembered its former life. Out of the chaos came something new. White sheets of paper, smooth and waiting, and see how curious fate can be. The Norwegian rag became a fine page on which a young man from Bergen wrote a trembling letter to his beloved, a Danish girl he had met while traveling abroad. He poured his heart onto that page, confessing that though the sea lay between their homelands, his soul would forever be bound to hers. Meanwhile, the Danish rag was turned into another sheet, one that found its way beneath the pen of a Danish poet. And what did he write? A poem about the northern lights, about the proud peaks of Norway and the steadfastness of its people. Words of admiration glowing like aurora across the paper's pale surface. Thus, by the alchemy of life and art, the two quarrelsome rags were reconciled. They who had once bickered in the dust of the paper yard now served together in harmony, the letter of love and the poem of praise. When both sheets had fulfilled their purpose, they were folded tenderly and kept side by side in a drawer, resting once again in quiet companionship. If they could still speak, they would surely laugh at their former quarrel and agree that even rags, when given a second life, may become instruments of beauty and peace. And that is the whole story, harmless, a little humorous, and true enough to make one smile. Only the rags, perhaps, might take offense. The Jewish girl. Among the other children in the charity school was a little Jewish girl, clever and good in fact, the brightest of them all. But there was one class she could not attend, the one where religion was taught, for she was in a Christian school. During the hour of this class, she had her geography book before her to study, or did her arithmetic, but the lessons were quickly learned, and then, though the book might still be open before her, she did not read from it. She listened. And the teacher soon noticed that she listened more intently than any of the rest. "Study your book," said the teacher, gently yet earnestly. But she looked back at him with her black, eager eyes, and when he put his questions to her as well as the rest, he found she knew more than all the others. She had listened, understood, and kept his words. Her father was a poor but honest man, and when he first brought her to the school, he had given instructions that she should not be taught the Christian faith, but to send her from the room during the scripture lesson might have given offense and raised various thoughts in the minds of the other children in the class, and so she remained. But this could not go on any longer. So, the teacher went to her father and explained that he must either take his daughter away from the school or consent to her becoming a Christian. I cannot bear to see those burning eyes, that sincere yearning thirst of the soul, so to speak, after the words of the gospel, he said. Then her father burst into tears. I know very little myself of our own faith, he replied. But her mother was a daughter of Israel, strong and steadfast in her faith, and on her deathbed I promised her that our child should never receive Christian baptism. That promise I must keep, for to me it is like a pact with God." So the little Jewish girl was taken away from the Christian school. Years had passed. In a humble household, in one of the smallest provincial towns of Jutland, there was a maidservant, a poor girl of the Jewish faith. This was Sarah. Her hair was as black as ebony, and her eyes were dark yet full of brilliant light, such eyes as you see among the daughters of the East. And the expression in the face of the grown-up girl was still that of the child who sat on the schoolroom bench, listening with eager and wistful eyes. Every Sunday the sound of the organ and the singing of the congregation sounded from the church, and the tones floated across the street and into the house where the Jewish girl attended diligently and faithfully to her work. "Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy," was her law. But her Sabbath was a day of labor to Christians, and only in her heart could she keep it holy. And that she believed was not enough. But then the thought came to her soul, "What do days and hours matter in the sight of God?" And on the Sunday of the Christians, she had her own undisturbed hour of devotion. Then, if the sound of the organ and the singing came across to her as she stood behind the sink in the kitchen, even this became a quiet and consecrated spot. Then she would read the treasure and property of her own people, the Old Testament, and that alone, for she kept deep in her heart what her father had told the teacher and herself when she was taken from the school. The promise he had made to her dying mother, that Sarah should not be baptized, nor forsake the faith of her fathers. The New Testament was, and would forever remain, a sealed book to her, and yet she knew much of it, for it shone through the memories of her childhood. One evening she was sitting in a corner of the living room while her master read aloud. She allowed herself to listen, for this was not the gospel. No, he was reading from an old storybook, so she could remain. The master read to them of a Hungarian knight who was taken captive by a Turkish pasha and yoked with oxen to the plow. He was driven with lashes of the whip and suffered pain and thirst almost beyond endurance. But at home, his wife sold her jewels and mortgaged their castle and lands, while friends contributed large sums to help raise the almost unbelievable amount of money that was demanded as ransom. This finally was collected, and he was delivered from slavery and disgrace. Sick and suffering, he returned home, but soon there resounded over the countryside the summons to a crusade against the foe of Christianity. The sick man heard the call and could have neither peace nor rest any longer. They had to lift him on his war horse. Then the blood rushed again to his cheeks. His strength seemed to return, and he rode forth to victory. The very pasha who had made him suffer pain and humiliation, yoked to the plow, became his captive. He was taken home to the castle dungeon. But before he had been there an hour, the knight came to him and asked his prisoner, "What do you think now awaits you?" "I know," replied the Turk, "retribution." "Yes, the retribution of a Christian," said the knight. "The teachings of Christ tell us to forgive our enemies and love our fellow men. God is love. Go in peace to your home and loved ones, and be gentle and good to all who suffer." Then the prisoner burst into tears. "How could I have believed such a thing possible?" he cried. "I was certain I would have to suffer shame and torture, hence I took poison, and within a few hours I shall die. There is no remedy. But before I die, teach me the faith which is so full of such love and mercy. It is great and divine. In that faith let me die. Let me die a Christian." And his request was granted him. That was the legend, the story that was read to them. All listened to it with close attention, but it sank deepest into the heart of her who sat in the corner, the servant maid, Sarah, the Jewess. Large tears stood in her sparkling coal-black eyes while she sat there, as years ago, on the school bench, and felt the greatness of the gospel. The tears rolled down her cheeks. "Let not my child become a Christian." Her mother's dying words rang through her soul with those of the law. "Honor thy father and thy mother." Still, I have not been baptized. They call me the Jewess. The boys of the neighborhood mocked me last Sunday as I stood outside the church door and looked in at the burning altar lights and the singing congregation. Ever since my school days, up to this very hour, the power of Christianity, which is like a sunbeam, and which, no matter how much I close my eyes, penetrates into my heart. But, my mother, I will not bring you sorrow in your grave. I will not betray the promise my father made to you. I will not read the Christian's Bible. Have I not the God of my fathers? On him let me rest my head. And the years rolled by. The husband died, and the wife was left in difficult circumstances. The servant girl had to be dismissed, but Sarah would not leave the widow. She became her help in time of trouble and kept the little household together. She worked late every night, and by the labor of her own hands got bread for the house. There were no close relatives to help a family where the widow grew weaker each day, lingering for months on a sickbed. Gentle and good, Sarah watched and nursed and labored, and was the blessing of the poverty-stricken home. "There is the Bible," said the sick woman one evening. "Read a little to me. The evening is so long, and I sadly need to hear the word of God." Sarah bowed her head, picked up the Bible, and folded her hands around it, opened it, and read aloud to the sick woman. Often the tears came into her eyes, but they shone more clearly, and the darkness lifted from her soul. "Mother, your child shall not receive the baptism of the Christians, shall not be named in their communion. You have wished it, and I shall honor your wish. In this we are united here on earth, but above, this is a greater union in God. He leads and guides us beyond death. I will pour water upon him that is thirsty, and floods upon the dry ground." Oh, I understand now. I do not know myself how I came to it. Through him it was, in him Christ. And she trembled as she spoke the holy name. A baptism of fire streamed through her, stronger than her feeble frame could bear. And she sank down, more exhausted even than the sick woman whom she nursed. "Poor Sarah," people said. "She is worn out with labor and nursing." They took her to the charity hospital, and there she died, and thence she was carried to her grave. It was not to the graveyard of the Christians. That was not the place for a Jewish girl. No, outside by the wall they dug a grave for her. But God's sun, which shines upon the graves of the Christians, shines as well upon that of the Jewish girl. And the hymns which are sung beside the Christian graves sound also beside her grave, outside the wall. And out there, too, reaches the promise. There is resurrection in Christ, in him, the Savior, who said to his disciples, "John truly baptized with water, but ye shall be baptized with the Holy Ghost." The shadow, in very hot climates, where the heat of the sun has great power, People are usually as brown as mahogany, and in the hottest countries they are Negroes with black skins. A learned man once traveled into one of these warm climates from the cold regions of the north and thought he would roam about as he did at home. But he soon had to change his opinion. He found that, like all sensible people, he must remain in the house during the whole day, with every window and door closed, so that it looked as if all in the house were asleep or absent. The houses of the narrow street in which he lived were so lofty that the sun shone upon them from morning till evening, and it became quite unbearable. This learned man from the cold regions was young as well as clever, but it seemed to him as if he were sitting in an oven, and he became quite exhausted and weak, and grew so thin that his shadow shriveled up and became much smaller than it had been at home. The sun took away even what was left of it, and he saw nothing of it till the evening, after sunset. It was really a pleasure, as soon as the lights were brought into the room, to see the shadow stretch itself against the wall, even to the ceiling, so tall was it, and it really wanted a good stretch to recover its strength. The learned man would sometimes go out into the balcony to stretch himself also, and as soon as the stars came forth in the clear, beautiful sky, he felt revived. People at this hour began to make their appearance in all the balconies in the street, for in warm climates every window has a balcony in which they can breathe the fresh evening air, which is very necessary even to those who are used to a heat that makes them as brown as mahogany. So that the street presented a very lively appearance. Here were shoemakers and tailors and all sorts of people sitting. In the street beneath, they brought out tables and chairs, lighted candles by hundreds, talked and sang, and were very merry. There were people walking, carriages driving, and mules trotting along, with their bells on the harness. Tingle, tingle, as they went. Then the dead were carried to the grave with the sound of solemn music and the tolling of the church bells. It was indeed a scene of varied life in the street. One house only, which was just opposite to the one in which the foreign learned man lived, formed a contrast to all this, for it was quite still. And yet somebody dwelt there, for flowers stood in the balcony, blooming beautifully in the hot sun. And this could not have been unless they had been watered carefully. Therefore, someone must be in the house to do this. The doors leading to the balcony were half opened in the evening, and although in the front room all was dark, music could be heard from the interior of the house. The foreign learned man considered this music very delightful, but perhaps he fancied it, for everything in these warm countries pleased him, excepting the heat of the sun. The foreign landlord said he did not know who had taken the opposite house. Nobody was to be seen there, and as to the music, he thought it seemed very tedious. To him, most uncommonly so. It is just as if someone was practicing a piece that he could not manage. It is always the same piece. He thinks, I suppose, that he will be able to manage it at last, but I do not think so, however long he may play it. Once the foreigner woke in the night. He slept with the door open which led to the balcony. The wind had raised the curtain before it, and there appeared a wonderful brightness over all in the balcony of the opposite house. The flowers seemed like flames of the most gorgeous colors, and among the flowers stood a beautiful, slender maiden. It was to him as if light streamed from her and dazzled his eyes. But then he had only just opened them, as he awoke from his sleep. With one spring he was out of bed, and crept softly behind the curtain. But she was gone. The brightness had disappeared. The flowers no longer appeared like flames, although still as beautiful as ever. The door stood ajar, and from an inner room sounded music so sweet and so lovely that it produced the most enchanting thoughts and acted on the senses with magic power. Who could live there? Where was the real entrance? For both in the street and in the lane at the side, the whole ground floor was a continuation of shops, and people could not always be passing through them. One evening, the foreigner sat in the balcony. A light was burning in his own room just behind him. It was quite natural, therefore, that his shadow should fall on the wall of the opposite house, so that, as he sat amongst the flowers on his balcony, when he moved, his shadow moved also. "I think my shadow is the only living thing to be seen opposite," said the learned man. "See how pleasantly it sits among the flowers. The door is only ajar. The shadow ought to be clever enough to step in and look about him, and then to come back and tell me what he has seen. You could make yourself useful in this way," said he, jokingly. "Be so good as to step in now, will you?" And then he nodded to the shadow, and the shadow nodded in return. "Now go, but don't stay away altogether." Then the foreigner stood up, and the shadow on the opposite balcony stood up also. The foreigner turned round, the shadow turned, and if anyone had observed, they might have seen it go straight into the half-open door of the opposite balcony as the learned man re-entered his own room and let the curtain fall. The next morning he went out to take his coffee and read the newspapers. "How is this?" he exclaimed as he stood in the sunshine. "I have lost my shadow. So it really did go away yesterday evening, and it has not returned. This is very annoying." And it certainly did vex him, not so much because the shadow was gone, but because he knew there was a story of a man without a shadow. All the people at home, in his country, knew this story, and when he returned and related his own adventures, they would say it was only an imitation, and he had no desire for such things to be said of him. So he decided not to speak of it at all, which was a very sensible determination. In the evening, he went out again on his balcony, taking care to place the light behind him, for he knew that a shadow always wants his master for a screen, but he could not entice him out. He made himself little, and he made himself tall, but there was no shadow, and no shadow came. He said, "Hem, ahem." But it was all useless. That was very vexatious. But in warm countries everything grows very quickly, and after a week had passed he saw, to his great joy, that a new shadow was growing from his feet when he walked in the sunshine, so that the root must have remained. After 3 weeks he had quite a respectable shadow, which, during his return journey to northern lands, continued to grow, and became at last so large that he might very well have spared half of it. When this learned man arrived at home, he wrote books about the true, the good, and the beautiful, which are to be found in this world. And so days and years passed. Many, many years. One evening, as he sat in his study, a very gentle tap was heard at the door. "Come in," said he, but no one came. He opened the door, and there stood before him a man so remarkably thin that he felt seriously troubled at his appearance. He was, however, very well dressed, and looked like a gentleman. "To whom have I the honor of speaking?" said he. "Ah, I hoped you would recognize me," said the elegant stranger. "I have gained so much that I have a body of flesh and clothes to wear. You never expected to see me in such a condition." Do you not recognize your old shadow? Ah, you never expected that I should return to you again. All has been prosperous with me since I was with you last. I have become rich in every way, and were I inclined to purchase my freedom from service, I could easily do so." And as he spoke, he rattled between his fingers a number of costly trinkets, which hung to a thick gold watch chain he wore round his neck. Diamond rings sparkled on his fingers, and it was all real. "I cannot recover from my astonishment," said the learned man. "What does all this mean?" "Something rather unusual," said the shadow. "But you are yourself an uncommon man, and you know very well that I have followed in your footsteps ever since your childhood. As soon as you found that I have traveled enough to be trusted alone, I went my own way, and I am now in the most brilliant circumstances. But I felt a kind of longing to see you once more before you die, and I wanted to see this place again, for there is always a clinging to the land of one's birth. I know that you have now another shadow. Do I owe you anything? If so, have the goodness to say what it is." "No? Is it really you?" said the learned man. "Well, this is most remarkable. I never supposed it possible that a man's old shadow could become a human being." "Just tell me what I owe you," said the shadow, "for I do not like to be in debt to any man." "How can you talk in that manner?" said the learned man. "What question of debt can there be between us? You are as free as anyone. I rejoice exceedingly to hear of your good fortune. Sit down, old friend, and tell me a little of how it happened, and what you saw in the house opposite to me while we were in those hot climates." "Yes, I will tell you all about it," said the shadow, sitting down. "But then you must promise me never to tell in this city, wherever you may meet me, that I have been your shadow. I am thinking of being married, for I have more than sufficient to support a family." "Make yourself quite easy," said the learned man. "I will tell no one who you really are. Here is my hand, I promise, and a word is sufficient between man and man." "Between man and a shadow," said the shadow, for he could not help saying so. It was really most remarkable how very much he had become a man in appearance. He was dressed in a suit of the very finest black cloth, polished boots, and an opera crush hat, which could be folded together so that nothing could be seen but the crown and the rim, besides the trinkets, the gold chain, and the diamond rings already spoken of. The shadow was, in fact, very well dressed, and this made a man of him. "Now I will relate to you what you wish to know," said the shadow, placing his foot with the polished leather boot as firmly as possible on the arm of the new shadow of the learned man, which lay at his feet like a poodle dog. This was done, it might be from pride, or perhaps that the new shadow might cling to him, but the prostrate shadow remained quite quiet and at rest in order that it might listen, for it wanted to know how a shadow could be sent away by its master and become a man itself. "Do you know," said the shadow, "that in the house opposite to you lived the most glorious creature in the world? It was poetry. I remained there 3 weeks, and it was more like 3,000 years, for I read all that has ever been written in poetry or prose, and I may say in truth that I saw and learnt everything." "Poetry," exclaimed the learned man. "Yes, she lives as a hermit in great cities. Poetry. Well, I saw her once for a very short moment, while sleep weighed down my eyelids. She flashed upon me from the balcony like the radiant aurora borealis, surrounded with flowers like flames of fire. Tell me, you were on the balcony that evening. You went through the door, and what did you see?" "I found myself in an anteroom," said the shadow. "You still sat opposite to me, looking into the room. There was no light, or at least it seemed in partial darkness, for the door of a whole suite of rooms stood open, and they were brilliantly lighted. The blaze of light would have killed me had I approached too near the maiden myself, but I was cautious and took time, which is what everyone ought to do." "And what didst thou see?" asked the learned man. "I saw everything, as you shall hear, but it really is not pride on my part, as a free man and possessing the knowledge that I do, besides my position, not to speak of my wealth. I wish you would say you to me instead of thou." "I beg your pardon," said the learned man. "It is an old habit which it is difficult to break. You are quite right, I will try to think of it. But now tell me everything that you saw." "Everything," said the shadow, "for I saw and know everything. Ye." "What was the appearance of the inner rooms?" asked the scholar. "Was it there like a cool grove, or like a holy temple? Were the chambers like a starry sky seen from the top of a high mountain?" "It was all that you describe," said the shadow. "But I did not go quite in. I remained in the twilight of the anteroom. But I was in a very good position. I could see and hear all that was going on in the court of poetry." "But what did you see? Did the gods of ancient times pass through the rooms? Did old heroes fight their battles over again? Were there lovely children at play who related their dreams? I tell you I have been there, and therefore you may be sure that I saw everything that was to be seen. If you had gone there, you would not have remained a human being, whereas I became one. And at the same moment I became aware of my inner being, my inborn affinity to the nature of poetry. It is true I did not think much about it while I was with you, but you will remember that I was always much larger at sunrise and sunset, and in the moonlight even more visible than yourself. But I did not then understand my inner existence. In the anteroom it was revealed to me. I became a man. I came out in full maturity. But you had left the warm countries. As a man, I felt ashamed to go about without boots or clothes, and that exterior finish by which man is known. So I went my own way. I can tell you, for you will not put it in a book. I hid myself under the cloak of a cake woman, but she little thought who she concealed. It was not till evening that I ventured out. I ran about the streets in the moonlight. I drew myself up to my full height upon the walls, which tickled my back very pleasantly. I ran here and there, looked through the highest windows into the rooms and over the roofs. I looked in and saw what nobody else could see, or indeed ought to see. In fact, it is a bad world, and I would not care to be a man, but that men are of some importance. I saw the most miserable things going on between husbands and wives, parents and children, sweet, incomparable children. I have seen what no human being has the power of knowing, although they would all be very glad to know the evil conduct of their neighbors. Had I written a newspaper, how eagerly it would have been read. Instead of which, I wrote directly to the persons themselves, and great alarm arose in all the town I visited. They had so much fear of me, and yet how dearly they loved me. The professor made me a professor. The tailor gave me new clothes. I am well provided for in that way. The overseer of the mint struck coins for me. The women declared that I was handsome, and so I became the man you now see me. And now I must say adieu. Here is my card. I live on the sunny side of the street and always stay at home in rainy weather. and the shadow departed. "This is all very remarkable," said the learned man. Years passed, days and years went by, and the shadow came again. "How are you going on now?" he asked. "Ah," said the learned man, "I am writing about the true, the beautiful, and the good, but no one cares to hear anything about it. I am quite in despair, for I take it to heart very much." "That is what I never do," said the shadow. "I am growing quite fat and stout, which everyone ought to be. You do not understand the world. You will make yourself ill about it. You ought to travel. I am going on a journey in the summer. Will you go with me? I should like a traveling companion. Will you travel with me as my shadow? It would give me great pleasure, and I will pay all expenses." "Are you going to travel far?" asked the learned man. "That is a matter of opinion," replied the shadow. "At all events, a journey will do you good, and if you will be my shadow, then all your journey shall be paid." "It appears to me very absurd," said the learned man. "But it is the way of the world," replied the shadow, "and always will be." Then he went away. Everything went wrong with the learned man. Sorrow and trouble pursued him, and what he said about the good, the beautiful, and the true was of as much value to most people as a nutmeg would be to a cow. At length, he fell ill. "You really look like a shadow," people said to him, and then a cold shudder would pass over him, for he had his own thoughts on the subject. "You really ought to go to some watering place," said the shadow on his next visit. "There is no other chance for you. I will take you with me, for the sake of old acquaintance. I will pay the expenses of your journey, and you shall write a description of it to amuse us by the way. I should like to go to a watering place. My beard does not grow as it ought, which is from weakness, and I must have a beard. Now, do be sensible and accept my proposal. We shall travel as intimate friends." And at last they started together. The shadow was master now, and the master became the shadow. They drove together and rode and walked in company with each other, side by side, or one in front and the other behind, according to the position of the sun. The shadow always knew when to take the place of honor, but the learned man took no notice of it, for he had a good heart and was exceedingly mild and friendly. One day the master said to the shadow, "We have grown up together from our childhood, and now that we have become traveling companions, shall we not drink to our good fellowship, and say thee and thou to each other?" "What you say is very straightforward and kindly meant," said the shadow, who was now really master. "I will be equally kind and straightforward. You are a learned man, and know how wonderful human nature is. There are some men who cannot endure the smell of brown paper. It makes them ill. Others will feel a shuddering sensation to their very marrow if a nail is scratched on a pane of glass. I myself have a similar kind of feeling when I hear anyone say thou to me. I feel crushed by it, as I used to feel in my former position with you. You will perceive that this is a matter of feeling, not pride. I cannot allow you to say thou to me. I will gladly say it to you, and therefore your wish will be half fulfilled." But then the shadow addressed his former master as thou. "It is going rather too far," said the latter, "that I am to say you when I speak to him, and he is to say thou to me." However, he was obliged to submit. They arrived at length at the baths, where there were many strangers, and among them a beautiful princess, whose real disease consisted in being too sharp-sighted, which made everyone very uneasy. she saw at once that the newcomer was very different to everyone else. "They say he is here to make his beard grow," she thought, "but I know the real cause. He is unable to cast a shadow." Then she became very curious on the matter, and one day, while on the promenade, she entered into conversation with the strange gentleman. Being a princess, she was not obliged to stand upon much ceremony, so she said to him without hesitation, "Your illness consists in not being able to cast a shadow. Your Royal Highness must be on the high road to recovery from your illness," said he. "I know your complaint arose from being too sharp-sighted, and in this case it has entirely failed. I happen to have a most unusual shadow. Have you not seen a person who is always at my side? Persons often give their servants finer cloth for their liveries than for their own clothes, and so I have dressed out my shadow like a man. Nay, you may observe that I have even given him a shadow of his own. It is rather expensive, but I like to have things about me that are peculiar." "How is this?" thought the princess. "Am I really cured? This must be the best watering place in existence. Water in our times has certainly wonderful power. But I will not leave this place yet, just as it begins to be amusing. This foreign prince, for he must be a prince, pleases me above all things. I only hope his beard won't grow, or he will leave at once." In the evening, the princess and the shadow danced together in the large assembly rooms. She was light, but he was lighter still. She had never seen such a dancer before. She told him from what country she had come, and found he knew it and had been there, but not while she was at home. He had looked into the windows of her father's palace, both the upper and the lower windows. He had seen many things, and could therefore answer the princess, and make allusions which quite astonished her. She thought he must be the cleverest man in all the world, and felt the greatest respect for his knowledge. When she danced with him again, she fell in love with him, which the shadow quickly discovered, for she had with her eyes looked him through and through. They danced once more, and she was nearly telling him, but she had some discretion. She thought of her country, her kingdom, and the number of people over whom she would one day have to rule. "He is a clever man," she thought to herself, "which is a good thing, and he dances admirably, which is also good. But has he well-grounded knowledge? That is an important question, and I must try him." Then she asked him a most difficult question. She herself could not have answered it, and the shadow made a most unaccountable grimace. "You cannot answer that," said the princess. "I learnt something about it in my childhood," he replied, "and believe that even my very shadow, standing over there by the door, could answer it." "Your shadow," said the princess. "Indeed, that would be very remarkable." "I do not say so positively," observed the shadow, "but I am inclined to believe that he can do so. He has followed me for so many years and has heard so much from me that I think it is very likely. But your Royal Highness must allow me to observe that he is very proud of being considered a man, and to put him in a good humor so that he may answer correctly, he must be treated as a man." "I shall be very pleased to do so," said the princess. So she walked up to the learned man, who stood in the doorway, and spoke to him of the sun and the moon, of the green forests, and of people near home and far off. And the learned man conversed with her pleasantly and sensibly. "What a wonderful man he must be to have such a clever shadow," thought she. "If I were to choose him, it would be a real blessing to my country and my subjects, and I will do it." So the princess and the shadow were soon engaged to each other, but no one was to be told a word about it till she returned to her kingdom. "No one shall know," said the shadow, "not even my own shadow." And he had very particular reasons for saying so. After a time, the princess returned to the land over which she reigned, and the shadow accompanied her. "Listen, my friend," said the shadow to the learned man. "Now that I am as fortunate and as powerful as any man can be, I will do something unusually good for you. You shall live in my palace, drive with me in the royal carriage, and have $100,000 a year. But you must allow everyone to call you a shadow, and never venture to say that you have been a man. And once a year, when I sit in my balcony in the sunshine, you must lie at my feet as becomes a shadow to do. For I must tell you, I am going to marry the princess, and our wedding will take place this evening." "Now, really, this is too ridiculous," said the learned man. "I cannot and will not submit to such folly. It would be cheating the whole country, and the princess also. I will disclose everything and say that I am the man, and that you are only a shadow dressed up in men's clothes." "Bon, no one would believe you," said the shadow. "Be reasonable now, or I will call the guards." "I will go straight to the princess," said the learned man. "But I shall be there first," replied the shadow, "and you will be sent to prison." And so it turned out, for the guards readily obeyed him, as they knew he was going to marry the king's daughter. "You tremble," said the princess, when the shadow appeared before her. "Has anything happened? You must not be ill today, for this evening our wedding will take place. I have gone through the most terrible affair that could possibly happen," said the shadow. "Only imagine, my shadow has gone mad. I suppose such a poor, shallow brain could not bear much. He fancies that he has become a real man, and that I am his shadow." "How very terrible!" cried the princess. "Is he locked up?" "Oh yes, certainly, for I fear he will never recover." "Poor shadow," said the princess. "It is very unfortunate for him. It would really be a good deed to free him from his frail existence. And indeed, when I think how often people take the part of the lower class against the higher, in these days, it would be policy to put him out of the way quietly. It is certainly rather hard upon him, for he was a faithful servant," said the shadow, and he pretended to sigh. "Yours is a noble character," said the princess, and bowed herself before him. In the evening the whole town was illuminated, and cannons fired. Boom! And the soldiers presented arms. It was indeed a grand wedding. The princess and the shadow stepped out on the balcony to show themselves and to receive one cheer more. But the learned man heard nothing of all these festivities, for he had already been executed. The Shepherdess and the Sweep. Have you ever seen an old wooden cupboard quite black with age and ornamented with carved foliage and curious figures? Well, just such a cupboard stood in a parlor and had been left to the family as a legacy by the great-grandmother. It was covered from top to bottom with carved roses and tulips. The most curious scrolls were drawn upon it, and out of them peeped little stags' heads with antlers. In the middle of the cupboard door was the carved figure of a man most ridiculous to look at. He grinned at you, for no one could call it laughing. He had goat's legs, little horns on his head, and a long beard. The children in the room always called him Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs. It was certainly a very difficult name to pronounce, and there are very few who ever receive such a title. But then it seemed wonderful how he came to be carved at all. Yet there he was, always looking at the table under the looking-glass, where stood a very pretty little shepherdess made of china. Her shoes were gilt, and her dress had a red rose or an ornament. She wore a hat and carried a crook that were both gilded and looked very bright and pretty. Close by her side stood a little chimney sweep, as black as coal, and also made of china. He was, however, quite as clean and neat as any other china figure. He only represented a black chimney sweep, and the china workers might just as well have made him a prince, had they felt inclined to do so. He stood holding his ladder quite handily, and his face was as fair and rosy as a girl's. Indeed, that was rather a mistake. It should have had some black marks on it. He and the shepherdess had been placed close together, side by side, and, being so placed, they became engaged to each other, for they were very well suited, being both made of the same sort of china, and being equally fragile. Close to them stood another figure, 3 times as large as they were, and also made of china. He was an old Chinaman who could nod his head and used to pretend that he was the grandfather of the shepherdess, although he could not prove it. He, however, assumed authority over her, and therefore when Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs asked for the little shepherdess to be his wife, he nodded his head to show that he consented. "You will have a husband," said the old Chinaman to her, "who I really believe is made of mahogany. He will make you a lady of Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs. He has the whole cupboard full of silver plate, which he keeps locked up in secret drawers." "I won't go into the dark cupboard," said the little shepherdess. "I have heard that he has 11 china wives there already." "Then you shall be the 12th," said the old Chinaman. "Tonight, as soon as you hear a rattling in the old cupboard, you shall be married, as true as I am a Chinaman." And then he nodded his head and fell asleep. Then the little shepherdess cried and looked at her sweetheart, the china chimney sweep. "I must entreat you," said she, "to go out with me into the wide world, for we cannot stay here." "I will do whatever you wish," said the little chimney sweep. "Let us go immediately. I think I shall be able to maintain you with my profession." "If we were but safely down from the table," said she, "I shall not be happy till we are really out in the world." Then he comforted her and showed her how to place her little foot on the carved edge and gilt leaf ornaments of the table. He brought his little ladder to help her, and so they contrived to reach the floor. But when they looked at the old cupboard, they saw it was all in an uproar. The carved stags pushed out their heads, raised their antlers, and twisted their necks. The Major General sprung up in the air and cried out to the old Chinaman, "They are running away! They are running away!" The two were rather frightened at this, so they jumped into the drawer of the window seat. Here were 3 or 4 packs of cards, not quite complete, and a doll's theater, which had been built up very neatly. A comedy was being performed in it, and all the queens of diamonds, clubs, and hearts, and spades sat in the first row fanning themselves with tulips, and behind them stood all the knaves, showing that they had heads above and below as playing cards generally have. The play was about 2 lovers who were not allowed to marry, and the shepherdess wept because it was so like her own story. "I cannot bear it," said she. "I must get out of the drawer." But when they reached the floor and cast their eyes on the table, there was the old Chinaman awake and shaking his whole body, till all at once down he came on the floor. Plump! "The old Chinaman is coming," cried the little shepherdess in a fright, and down she fell on one knee. "I have thought of something," said the chimney sweep. "Let us get into the great pot-pourri jar which stands in the corner. There we can lie on rose leaves and lavender, and throw salt in his eyes if he comes near us." "No, that will never do," said she, "because I know that the Chinaman and the pot-pourri jar were lovers once, and there always remains behind a feeling of goodwill between those who have been so intimate as that. No, there is nothing left for us but to go out into the wide world." "Have you really courage enough to go out into the wide world with me?" said the chimney sweep. "Have you thought how large it is, and that we can never come back here again?" "Yes, I have," she replied. When the chimney sweep saw that she was quite firm, he said, "My way is through the stove and up the chimney. Have you courage to creep with me through the firebox and the iron pipe? When we get to the chimney, I shall know how to manage very well. We shall soon climb too high for anyone to reach us, and we shall come through a hole in the top out into the wide world." So he led her to the door of the stove. "It looks very dark," said she. Still she went in with him through the stove and through the pipe, where it was as dark as pitch. "Now we are in the chimney," said he. "And look, there is a beautiful star shining above it." It was a real star shining down upon them as if it would show them the way. So they clambered and crept on, and a frightful, steep place it was. But the chimney sweep helped her and supported her till they got higher and higher. He showed her the best places on which to set her little china foot. So at last they reached the top of the chimney and sat themselves down, for they were very tired, as may be supposed. The sky, with all its stars, was over their heads, and below were the roofs of the town. They could see for a very long distance out into the wide world, and the poor little shepherdess leaned her head on her chimney sweep's shoulder and wept till she washed the gilt off her sash. The world was so different to what she expected. "This is too much," she said. "I cannot bear it. The world is too large. Oh, I wish I were safe back on the table again, under the looking-glass. I shall never be happy till I am safe back again. Now, I have followed you out into the wide world. You will take me back if you love me." Then the chimney sweep tried to reason with her, and spoke of the old Chinaman and of the Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's legs. But she sobbed so bitterly and kissed her little chimney sweep till he was obliged to do all she asked, foolish as it was. And so, with a great deal of trouble, they climbed down the chimney, and then crept through the pipe and stove, which were certainly not very pleasant places. Then they stood in the dark firebox and listened behind the door to hear what was going on in the room. As it was all quiet, they peeped out. Alas, there lay the old Chinaman on the floor. He had fallen down from the table as he attempted to run after them, and was broken into 3 pieces. His back had separated entirely, and his head had rolled into a corner of the room. The Major General stood in his old place and appeared lost in thought. "This is terrible," said the little shepherdess. "My poor old grandfather is broken to pieces, and it is our fault. I shall never live after this." And she wrung her little hands. "He can be riveted," said the chimney sweep. "He can be riveted. Do not be so hasty. If they cement his back and put a good rivet in it, he will be as good as new, and be able to say as many disagreeable things to us as ever." "Do you think so?" said she. And then they climbed up to the table and stood in their old places. "As we have done no good," said the chimney sweep, "we might as well have remained here instead of taking so much trouble." "I wish grandfather was riveted," said the shepherdess. "Will it cost much, I wonder?" And she had her wish. The family had the Chinaman's back mended and a strong rivet put through his neck. He looked as good as new, but he could no longer nod his head. "You have become proud since your fall broke you to pieces," said Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs. "You have no reason to give yourself such airs. Am I to have her or not?" The chimney sweep and the little shepherdess looked piteously at the old Chinaman, for they were afraid he might nod, but he was not able. Besides, it was so tiresome to be always telling strangers he had a rivet in the back of his neck. And so the little China people remained together and were glad of the grandfather's rivet and continued to love each other till they were broken to pieces. The angel. Whenever a good child leaves the world, an angel of God descends from the heights of heaven. With arms full of mercy and wings as white as dawn, he gathers the little one into his embrace. Then, together, they rise through the quiet air. Their flight is not hurried, for heaven is patient, and the angel wishes to show the child all the places on earth that had once brought joy to the innocent heart, now at rest. Below them lie meadows and winding paths, sunlit gardens and familiar doorsteps where laughter had once rung. The angel glides gently, his great wings spreading light across the slumbering earth. Wherever the child's eyes had once lingered with wonder, the angel pauses, as if the memory itself were sacred. Then he stoops and gathers a handful of flowers, the bright and the humble alike, for they are all God's creation. When at last he carries them to the Almighty, they bloom with a radiance no earthly sun could give. And when the Lord presses the blossoms to his heart, one flower, the one that has pleased him most, he kisses. That kiss gives it a voice, and the flower begins to sing, joining the eternal chorus that fills the halls of heaven. These words were spoken by an angel of God as he ascended through the starry night, holding a child close to his breast. The child, still half dreaming, heard the angel's gentle voice and smiled in his sleep. They drifted over the town where he had lived, its rooftops silvered by moonlight, its gardens resting in silence. "Tell me," said the angel softly, "which of these flowers shall we take with us to bloom forever in the gardens above?" Near them grew a rose bush, slender and fair, but its stem was broken. The blossoms hung lifeless, their petals pale and drooping. "Poor rose bush," whispered the child, pity shining in his eyes. "Let us take it with us, so it may live again in God's garden and never be broken any more." The angel bent low, touched the rose bush with compassion, and gathered it up as though it were a sleeping soul. Then he kissed the child's brow, and the child's eyes fluttered open. Not in fear, but in a soft light of recognition. They gathered more flowers, lilies and violets, buttercups that glowed like tiny suns, and a few modest blossoms that most would have passed by. "Now we have enough," said the child. But the angel did not yet turn his face toward heaven. It was night, and the great city slept beneath them. The streets were still, save for a whisper of wind. The angel hovered over a narrow lane, where refuse and ashes lay piled against the walls, fragments of old life, broken plates, torn garments, forgotten toys. Amid this heap of sorrow and neglect, the angel pointed. "Look," he said. Among the dust lay the shattered pieces of a flower pot, and within them a clump of dried earth still held together by the roots of a small, withered field flower. "We will take this too," said the angel. The child looked surprised. "But why?" "You shall know," said the angel, "as we rise together." And as they ascended, the angel began to tell his story. "In that street," he said, "in a damp cellar beneath the cobblestones, lived a poor boy, frail and sickly from birth. He could never run or play as others did. His legs were weak, and even on his best days, he could walk only a few steps with the help of his crutches. But he had a brave heart and a soul filled with light. Each summer, when the sun reached its highest arc, a single golden beam would slip through the narrow window and lie across the cellar floor for a little while. The boy would sit there, holding his thin hands in the sunlight, watching the glow pass through his fingers. He would smile then and whisper, "I've been outside today." He had never seen the forest, nor the green canopy of spring. But one kind neighbor's son once brought him a branch of beech leaves, fresh and fragrant. The boy hung it over his bed and closed his eyes, imagining that he was walking through the woods, hearing the birds and feeling the wind. One spring morning, that same boy brought him a small handful of wildflowers. Among them was one, a simple field flower, whose roots still clung to a bit of soil. The sick child planted it carefully in a broken pot, setting it on the tiny window ledge. He watered it each morning with trembling hands. The flower took root and grew strong. Every year it blossomed again, its petals lifting toward the faint rays of sunlight that visited the cellar. It became the poor boy's garden, his world, his joy, his companion. He spoke to it, cared for it, and dreamed beside it. The flower gave him hope, and in return, he gave it love. When the boy's last day came, he looked at the flower one more time, smiling faintly as he whispered a prayer. Then the Lord called him home. For a year the flower stood alone in the window, withering in silence. When the family left that poor dwelling, the pot was broken and thrown out among the refuse. "And that," said the angel, his voice tender as dawn, "is the flower we now take with us. For though it lies forgotten and dry, it brought more happiness to one's soul than all the roses in a queen's garden." The child gazed up, his heart full of wonder. "But how do you know this, dear angel?" The angel's eyes shone like morning stars. "Because," he said softly, "I was that sick boy, and I have never forgotten the flower that taught me joy." Then the child's spirit opened its eyes, truly opened, and he saw the angel's face, bright with peace and remembrance. Together they passed through the veil of light, where music and color wove through eternity. When they reached heaven, God himself gathered the child in his arms and held him close. New wings unfurled from the child's shoulders, soft, radiant, and pure. Hand in hand, he and the angel rose higher, singing in harmony. Then the Almighty pressed all the flowers to his heart. He kissed the withered field flower, the smallest of them all, and it came alive again. Its voice lifted and joined the celestial song as all the angels circled the throne in endless praise. And among their shining ranks were two, the good, happy child, and the humble field flower that had once grown in the shadow of sorrow, forgotten on a heap of ashes, but now radiant among the stars. The Snow Queen, first story, which treats of a mirror and of the splinters. Now then, let us begin. When we are at the end of the story, we shall know more than we know now. But to begin. Once upon a time, there was a wicked sprite. Indeed, he was the most mischievous of all sprites. One day he was in a very good humor, for he had made a mirror with the power of causing all that was good and beautiful, when it was reflected therein, to look poor and mean. But that which was good for nothing and looked ugly was shown magnified and increased in ugliness. In this mirror, the most beautiful landscapes looked like boiled spinach, and the best persons were turned into frights, or appeared to stand on their heads. Their faces were so distorted that they were not to be recognized, and if anyone had a mole, you might be sure that it would be magnified and spread over both nose and mouth. "That's glorious fun," said the sprite. If a good thought passed through a man's mind, then a grin was seen in the mirror, and the sprite laughed heartily at his clever discovery. All the little sprites who went to his school, for he kept a sprite school, told each other that a miracle had happened, and that now only, as they thought, it would be possible to see how the world really looked. They ran about with the mirror, and at last there was not a land or a person who was not represented distorted in the mirror. So then they thought they would fly up to the sky and have a joke there. The higher they flew with the mirror, the more terribly it grinned. They could hardly hold it fast. Higher and higher still they flew, nearer and nearer to the stars, when suddenly the mirror shook so terribly with grinning that it flew out of their hands and fell to the earth, where it was dashed in 100,000,000 and more pieces. And now it worked much more evil than before, for some of these pieces were hardly so large as a grain of sand, and they flew about in the wide world, and when they got into people's eyes, there they stayed. And then people saw everything perverted, or only had an eye for that which was evil. This happened because the very smallest bit had the same power which the whole mirror had possessed. Some persons even got a splinter in their heart, and then it made one shudder, for their heart became like a lump of ice. Some of the broken pieces were so large that they were used for window panes, through which one could not see one's friends. Other pieces were put in spectacles, and that was a sad affair when people put on their glasses to see well and rightly. Then the wicked sprite laughed till he almost choked, for all this tickled his fancy. The fine splinters still flew about in the air. And now we shall hear what happened next. Second story. A little boy and a little girl. In a large town where there are so many houses and so many people that there is no roof left for everybody to have a little garden, and where, on this account, most persons are obliged to content themselves with flowers in pots, there lived two little children who had a garden somewhat larger than a flower pot. They were not brother and sister, but they cared for each other as much as if they were. Their parents lived exactly opposite. They inhabited two garrets, and where the roof of the one house joined that of the other, and the gutter ran along the extreme end of it, there was to each house a small window. One needed only to step over the gutter to get from one window to the other. The children's parents had large wooden boxes there, in which vegetables for the kitchen were planted, and little rosa trees besides. There was a rose in each box, and they grew splendidly. They now thought of placing the boxes across the gutter so that they nearly reached from one window to the other and looked just like two walls of flowers. The tendrils of the peas hung down over the boxes, and the rose trees shot up long branches, twined round the windows, and then bent towards each other. It was almost like a triumphant arch of foliage and flowers. The boxes were very high, and the children knew that they must not creep over them, so they often obtained permission to get out of the windows to each other and to sit on their little stools among the roses, where they could play delightfully. In winter there was an end of this pleasure. The windows were often frozen over, but then they heated copper farthings on the stove and laid the hot farthing on the window pane. And then they had a capital peephole, quite nicely rounded. And out of each peeped a gentle, friendly eye. It was the little boy and the little girl who were looking out. His name was Kay. Hers was Gerda. In summer, with one jump, they could get to each other. But in winter they were obliged first to go down the long stairs, and then up the long stairs again. And out of doors there was quite a snowstorm. "It is the white bees that are swarming," said Kay's old grandmother. "Do the white bees choose a queen?" asked the little boy, for he knew that the honey bees always have one. "Yes," said the grandmother. "She flies where the swarm hangs in the thickest clusters. She is the largest of all, and she can never remain quietly on the earth, but goes up again into the black clouds. Many a winter's night she flies through the streets of the town and peeps in at the windows, and they then freeze in so wondrous a manner that they look like flowers." "Yes, I have seen it," said both the children, and so they knew that it was true. "Can the Snow Queen come in?" said the little girl. "Only let her come in," said the little boy. "Then I'd put her on the stove and she'd melt." And then his grandmother patted his head and told him other stories. In the evening, when little Kay was at home and half undressed, he climbed up on the chair by the window and peeped out of the little hole. A few snowflakes were falling, and one, the largest of all, remained lying on the edge of a flower pot. The flake of snow grew larger and larger, and at last it was like a young lady, dressed in the finest white gauze, made of 1,000,000 little flakes like stars. She was so beautiful and delicate, but she was of ice, of dazzling, sparkling ice. Yet she lived. Her eyes gazed fixedly, like two stars, but there was neither quiet nor repose in them. She nodded towards the window and beckoned with her hand. The little boy was frightened and jumped down from the chair. It seemed to him as if at the same moment a large bird flew past the window. The next day it was a sharp frost, and then the spring came. The sun shone, the green leaves appeared, the swallows built their nests, the windows were opened, and the little children again sat in their pretty garden, high up on the leads at the top of the house. That summer the roses flowered in unwonted beauty. The little girl had learned a hymn in which there was something about roses, and then she thought of her own flowers, and she sang the verse to the little boy, who then sang it with her. "The rose in the valley is blooming so sweet, and angels descend there the children to greet." And the children held each other by the hand, kissed the roses, looked up at the clear sunshine, and spoke as though they really saw angels there. What lovely summer days those were! How delightful to be out in the air, near the fresh rose bushes that seem as if they would never finish blossoming. Kay and Gerda looked at the picture book full of beasts and of birds, and it was then the clock in the church tower was just striking 5, that Kay said, "Oh, I feel such a sharp pain in my heart, and now something has got into my eye." The little girl put her arms around his neck. He winked his eaves. Now there was nothing to be seen. "I think it is out now," said he, but it was not. It was just one of those pieces of glass from the magic mirror that had got into his eye. And poor Kay had got another piece right in his heart. It will soon become like ice. It did not hurt any longer, but there it was. "What are you crying for?" asked he. "You look so ugly. There's nothing the matter with me." "Ah," said he at once, "that rose is cankered, and look, this one is quite crooked. After all, these roses are very ugly. They are just like the box they are planted in." And then he gave the box a good kick with his foot and pulled both the roses up. "What are you doing?" cried the little girl. And as he perceived her fright, he pulled up another rose, got in at the window, and hastened off from dear little Gerda. Afterwards, when she brought her picture book, he asked, "What horrid beasts have you there?" And if his grandmother told them stories, he always interrupted her. Besides, if he could manage it, he would get behind her, put on her spectacles, and imitate her way of speaking. He copied all her ways, and then everybody laughed at him. He was soon able to imitate the gait and manner of everyone in the street. Everything that was peculiar and displeasing in them, that Kay knew how to imitate, and at such times all the people said, "The boy is certainly very clever." But it was the glass he had got in his eye, the glass that was sticking in his heart, which made him tease even little Gerda, whose whole soul was devoted to him. His games now were quite different to what they had formerly been. They were so very knowing. One winter's day, when the flakes of snow were flying about, he spread the skirts of his blue coat and caught the snow as it fell. "Look through this glass, Gerda," said he, and every flake seemed larger and appeared like a magnificent flower or beautiful star. It was splendid to look at. "Look, how clever," said Kay. "That's much more interesting than real flowers. They are as exact as possible. There I not a fault in them, if they did not melt." It was not long after this that Kay came one day with large gloves on and his little sledge at his back, and bawled right into Gerda's ears, "I have permission to go out into the square where the others are playing." And off he was in a moment. There, in the marketplace, some of the boldest of the boys used to tie their sledges to the carts as they passed by. And so they were pulled along and got a good ride. It was so capital. Just as they were in the very height of their amusement, a large sledge passed by. It was painted quite white, and there was someone in it wrapped up in a rough, white mantle of fur, with a rough, white fur cap on his head. The sledge drove round the square twice, and Kay tied on his sledge as quickly as he could, and off he drove with it. On they went quicker and quicker into the next street, and the person who drove turned round to Kay and nodded to him in a friendly manner, just as if they knew each other. Every time he was going to untie his sledge, the person nodded to him, and then Kay sat quiet. And so on they went till they came outside the gates of the town. Then the snow began to fall so thickly that the little boy could not see an arm's length before him, but still on he went, when suddenly he let go the string he held in his hand in order to get loose from the sledge, but it was of no use. Still the little vehicle rushed on with the quickness of the wind. He then cried as loud as he could, but no one beard him. The snow drifted and the sledge flew on, and sometimes it gave a jerk as though they were driving over hedges and ditches. He was quite frightened, and he tried to repeat the Lord's Prayer. But all he could do, he was only able to remember the multiplication table. The snowflakes grew larger and larger, till at last they looked just like great white fowls. Suddenly they flew on one side. The large sledge stopped, and the person who drove rose up. It was a lady. Her cloak and cap were of snow. She was tall and of slender figure and of a dazzling whiteness. It was the Snow Queen. "We have traveled fast," said she, "but it is freezingly cold. Come under my bearskin." And she put him in the sledge beside her, wrapped the fur round him, and he felt as though he were sinking in a snow wreath. "Are you still cold?" asked she, and then she kissed his forehead. Ah, it was colder than ice. It penetrated to his very heart, which was already almost a frozen lump. It seemed to him as if he were about to die. But a moment more, and it was quite congenial to him, and he did not remark the cold that was around him. My sledge. Do not forget my sledge. It was the first thing he thought of. It was there tied to one of the white chickens, who flew along with it on his back behind the large sledge. The Snow Queen kissed Kay once more, and then he forgot little Gerda, grandmother, and all whom he had left at his home. "Now you will have no more kisses," said she, "or else I should kiss you to death." Kay looked at her. She was very beautiful. A more clever or a more lovely countenance he could not fancy to himself, and she no longer appeared of ice as before, when she sat outside the window and beckoned to him. In his eyes she was perfect. He did not fear her at all, and told her that he could calculate in his head and with fractions, even that he knew the number of square miles there were in the different countries, and how many inhabitants they contained. And she smiled while he spoke. It then seemed to him as if what he knew was not enough, and he looked upwards in the large, huge, empty space above him, and on she flew with him, flew high over the black clouds, while the storm moaned and whistled as though it were singing some old tune. On they flew over woods and lakes, over seas and many lands, and beneath them the chilling storm rushed fast. The wolves howled, the snow crackled. Above them flew large, screaming crows, but higher up appeared the moon, quite large and bright, and it was on it that Kay gazed during the long, long winter's night, while by day he slept at the feet of the Snow Queen. Third story of the Flower Garden. At the old woman's who understood witchcraft. But what became of little Gerda when Kay did not return? Where could he be? Nobody knew. Nobody could give any intelligence. All the boys knew was that they had seen him tie his sledge to another large and splendid one, which drove down the street and out of the town. Nobody knew where he was. Many sad tears were shed, and little Gerda wept long and bitterly. At last she said he must be dead, that he had been drowned in the river which flowed close to the town. Oh, those were very long and dismal winter evenings. At last spring came, with its warm sunshine. "Kay is dead and gone," said little Gerda. "That I don't believe," said the sunshine. "Kay is dead and gone," said she to the swallows. "That I don't believe," said they. And at last little Gerda did not think so any longer either. "I'll put on my red shoes," said she one morning. "Kay has never seen them, and then I'll go down to the river and ask there." It was quite early. She kissed her old grandmother, who was still asleep, put on her red shoes, and went alone to the river. "Is it true that you have taken my little playfellow? I will make you a present of my red shoes, if you will give him back to me." And, as it seemed to her, the blue waves nodded in a strange manner. Then she took off her red shoes, the most precious things she possessed, and threw them both into the river. But they fell close to the bank, and the little waves bore them immediately to land. It was as if the stream would not take what was dearest to her. For in reality, it had not got little Kay. But Gerda thought that she had not thrown the shoes out far enough, so she clambered into a boat which lay among the rushes, went to the farthest end, and threw out the shoes. But the boat was not fastened, and the motion which she occasioned made it drift from the shore. She observed this, and hastened to get back. But before she could do so, the boat was more than a yard from the land, and was gliding quickly onward. Little Gerda was very frightened, and began to cry. But no one heard her except the sparrows, and they could not carry her to land. But they flew along the bank and sang as if to comfort her. "Here we are, here we are." The boat drifted with the stream. Little Gerda sat quite still without shoes, for they were swimming behind the boat. But she could not reach them, because the boat went much faster than they did. The banks on both sides were beautiful, lovely flowers, venerable trees, and slopes with sheep and cows, but not a human being was to be seen. "Perhaps the river will carry me to little Kay," said she, and then she grew less sad. She rose and looked for many hours at the beautiful green banks. Presently she sailed by a large cherry orchard, where was a little cottage with curious red and blue windows. It was thatched, and before it 2 wooden soldiers stood sentry and presented arms when anyone went past. Gerda called to them, for she thought they were alive. But they, of course, did not answer. She came close to them, for the stream drifted the boat quite near the land. Gerda called still louder, and an old woman then came out of the cottage, leaning upon a crooked stick. She had a large, broad-brimmed hat on, painted with the most splendid flowers. "Poor little child," said the old woman, "how did you get upon the large, rapid river, to be driven about so in the wide world?" And then the old woman went into the water, caught hold of the boat with her crooked stick, drew it to the bank, and lifted little Gerda out. And Gerda was so glad to be on dry land again, but she was rather afraid of the strange old woman. "But come and tell me who you are, and how you came here," said she. And Gerda told her all, and the old woman shook her head and said, "Ahem, ahem." And when Gerda had told her everything, and asked her if she had not seen little Kay, the woman answered that he had not passed there, but he no doubt would come. And she told her not to be cast down, but taste her cherries, and look at her flowers, which were finer than any in a picture book, each of which could tell a whole story. She then took Gerda by the hand, led her into the little cottage, and locked the door. The windows were very high up. The glass was red, blue, and green, and the sunlight shone through quite wondrously in all sorts of colors. On the table stood the most exquisite cherries, and Gerda ate as many as she chose, for she had permission to do so. While she was eating, the old woman combed her hair with a golden comb, and her hair curled and shone with a lovely golden color around that sweet little face, which was so round and so like a rose. "I have often longed for such a dear little girl," said the old woman. "Now you shall see how well we agree together." And while she combed little Gerda's hair, the child forgot her foster brother Kay more and more, for the old woman understood magic. But she was no evil being. She only practiced witchcraft a little for her own private amusement, and now she wanted very much to keep little Gerda. She therefore went out in the garden, stretched out, her crooked stick towards the rose bushes, which, beautifully as they were blowing, all sank into the earth, and no one could tell where they had stood. The old woman feared that if Gerda should see the roses, she would then think of her own, would remember little Kay, and run away from her. She now led Gerda into the flower garden. Oh, what odor and what loveliness was there! Every flower that one could think of, and of every season, stood there in fullest bloom. No picture book could be gayer or more beautiful. Gerda jumped for joy, and played till the sun set behind the tall cherry tree. She then had a pretty bed, with a red silken coverlet filled with blue violets. She fell asleep, and had as pleasant dreams as ever, a queen on her wedding day. The next morning she went to play with the flowers in the warm sunshine, and thus passed away a day. Gerda knew every flower, and numerous as they were, it still seemed to Gerda that one was wanting, though she did not know which. One day, while she was looking at the hat of the old woman painted with flowers, the most beautiful of them all seemed to her to be a rose. The old woman had forgotten to take it from her hat when she made the others vanish in the earth. But so it is when one's thoughts are not collected. "What?" said Gerda. "Are there no roses here?" And she ran about amongst the flower beds, and looked, but there was not one to be found. She then sat down and wept, but her hot tears fell just where a rose bush had sunk, and when her warm tears watered the ground, the tree shot up suddenly as fresh and blooming as when it had been swallowed up. Gerda kissed the roses, thought of her own dear roses at home, and with them of little Kay. "Oh, how long I have stayed," said the little girl. "I intended to look for Kay. Don't you know where he is?" She asked of the roses, "Do you think he is dead and gone?" "Dead he certainly is not," said the roses. "We have been in the earth where all the dead are, but Kay was not there." "Many thanks," said little Gerda, and she went to the other flowers, looked into their cups, and asked, "Don't you know where little Kay is?" But every flower stood in the sunshine and dreamed its own fairy tale or its own story, and they all told her very many things, but not one knew anything of Kay. Well, what did the tiger lily say? "Hearest thou not the drum? Bum, bum. Those are the only two tones, always bum, bum. Hark to the plaintive song of the old woman, to the call of the priests. The Hindu woman in her long robe stands upon the funeral pile. The flames rise around her and her dead husband, but the Hindu woman thinks on the living one in the surrounding circle, on him whose eyes burn hotter than the flames, on him the fire of whose eyes pierces her heart more than the flames which soon will burn her body to ashes. Can the heart's flame die in the flame of the funeral pile?" "I don't understand that at all," said little Gerda. "That is my story," said the lily. "What did the convolvulus say?" "Projecting over a narrow mountain path, there hangs an old feudal castle. Thick evergreens grow on the dilapidated walls, and around the altar, where a lovely maiden is standing, she bends over the railing and looks out upon the rose. No fresher rose hangs on the branches than she. No apple blossom carried away by the wind is more buoyant. How her silken robe is rustling! Is he not yet come?" "Is it Kay that you mean?" asked little Gerda. I am speaking about my story, about my dream," answered the convolvulus. "What did the snowdrops say?" "Between the trees, a long board is hanging. It is a swing. 2 little girls are sitting in it and swing themselves backwards and forwards. Their frocks are as white as snow, and long green silk ribbons flutter from their bonnets. Their brother, who is older than they are, stands up in the swing. He twines his arms round the cords to hold himself fast, for in one hand he has a little cup, and in the other a clay pipe. He is blowing soap bubbles. The swing moves, and the bubbles float in charming, changing colors. The last is still hanging to the end of the pipe and rocks in the breeze. The swing moves. The little black dog, as light as a soap bubble, jumps up on his hind legs to try to get into the swing. It moves. The dog falls down, barks, and is angry. They tease him. The bubble bursts. A swing, a bursting bubble. Such is my song. What you relate may be very pretty, but you tell it in so melancholy a manner, and do not mention Kay. What do the hyacinths say? There were once upon a time 3 sisters, quite transparent and very beautiful. The robe of the one was red, that of the second blue, and that of the third white. They danced hand in hand beside the calm lake in the clear moonshine. They were not elfin maidens, but mortal children. A sweet fragrance was smelt, and the maidens vanished in the wood. The fragrance grew stronger. 3 coffins, and in them 3 lovely maidens, glided out of the forest and across the lake. The shining glowworms flew around like little floating lights. Do the dancing maidens sleep, or are they dead? The odor of the flowers says they are corpses. The evening bell tolls for the dead. You make me quite sad, said little Gerda. I cannot help thinking of the dead maidens. Oh, is little Kay really dead? The roses have been in the earth, and they say no. Ding dong, sounded the hyacinth bells. We do not toll for little Kay. We do not know him. That is our way of singing, the only one we have. And Gerda went to the ranunculuses that looked forth from among the shining green leaves. You are a little bright sun, said Gerda. Tell me if you know where I can find my playfellow. And the ranunculus shone brightly and looked again at Gerda. What song could the ranunculus sing? It was one that said nothing about Kay either. In a small court, the bright sun was shining in the first days of spring. The beams glided down the white walls of a neighbor's house, and close by the fresh yellow flowers were growing, shining like gold in the warm sun rays. An old grandmother was sitting in the air, her granddaughter, the poor and lovely servant, just come for a short visit. She knows her grandmother. There was gold, pure virgin gold, in that blessed kiss. There, that is my little story, said the ranunculus. My poor old grandmother, sighed Gerda. Yes, she is longing for me, no doubt. She is sorrowing for me, as she did for little Kay. But I will soon come home, and then I will bring Kay with me. It is of no use asking the flowers. They only know their own old rhymes, and can tell me nothing. And she tucked up her frock to enable her to run quicker, but the narcissus gave her a knock on the leg, just as she was going to jump over it. So she stood still, looked at the long yellow flower, and asked, You perhaps know something? And she bent down to the narcissus, and what did it say? I can see myself, I. Oh, how odorous I am. Up in the little garret there stands, half-dressed, a little dancer. She stands now on one leg, now on both. She despises the whole world, yet she lives only in imagination. She pours water out of the teapot over a piece of stuff which she holds in her hand. It is the bodice. Cleanliness is a fine thing. The white dress is hanging on the hook. It was washed in the teapot and dried on the roof. She puts it on, ties a saffron-colored kerchief round her neck, and then the gown looks whiter. I can see myself. I can see myself. That's nothing to me, said little Gerda. That does not concern me. And then off she ran to the further end of the garden. The gate was locked, but she shook the rusted bolt till it was loosened, and the gate opened. And little Gerda ran off barefooted into the wide world. She looked round her thrice, but no one followed her. At last she could run no longer. She sat down on a large stone, and when she looked about her, she saw that the summer had passed. It was late in the autumn, but that one could not remark in the beautiful garden, where there was always sunshine, and where there were flowers the whole year round. Dear me, how long I have stayed, said Gerda. Autumn is come. I must not rest any longer. And she got up to go further. Oh, how tender and wearied her little feet were. All around it looked so cold and raw. The long willow leaves were quite yellow, and the fog dripped from them like water. One leaf fell after the other. The sloes only stood full of fruit, which set one's teeth on edge. Oh, how dark and comfortless it was in the dreary world. Fourth story. The Prince and Princess Gerda was obliged to rest herself again, when, exactly opposite to her, a large raven came hopping over the white snow. He had long been looking at Gerda and shaking his head, and now he said, "Caw, caw, good day, good day." He could not say it better, but he felt a sympathy for the little girl, and asked her where she was going all alone. The word alone. Gerda understood quite well, and felt how much was expressed by it. So she told the raven her whole history, and asked if he had not seen Kay. The raven nodded very gravely and said, "It may be, it may be." "What, do you really think so?" cried the little girl, and she nearly squeezed the raven to death. So much did she kiss him. "Gently, gently," said the raven. "I think I know. I think that it may be little Kay. But now he has forgotten you for the princess." "Does he live with a princess?" asked Gerda. "Yes, listen," said the raven. "But it will be difficult for me to speak your language. If you understand the raven language, I can tell you better." "No, I have not learnt it," said Gerda. "But my grandmother understands it, and she can speak gibberish too. I wish I had learnt it." "No matter," said the raven. "I will tell you as well as I can. However, it will be bad enough." And then he told all he knew. "In the kingdom where we now are, there lives a princess, who is extraordinarily clever, for she has read all the newspapers in the whole world, and has forgotten them again. So clever is she. She was lately, it is said, sitting on her throne, which is not very amusing after all, when she began humming an old tune, and it was just, 'Oh, why should I not be married?' That song is not without its meaning," said she. And so then she was determined to marry. But she would have a husband who knew how to give an answer when he was spoken to, not one who looked only as if he were a great personage, for that is so tiresome. She then had all the ladies of the court drummed together, and when they heard her intention, all were very pleased and said, "We are very glad to hear it. It is the very thing we were thinking of." "You may believe every word I say," said the raven, "for I have a tame sweetheart that hops about in the palace quite free, and it was she who told me all this." The newspapers appeared forthwith with a border of hearts and the initials of the princess. and therein you might read that every good-looking young man was at liberty to come to the palace and speak to the princess, and he who spoke in such wise as showed he felt himself at home there, that one the princess would choose for her husband. Yes, yes, said the raven. You may believe it. It is as true as I am sitting here. People came in crowds. There was a crush and a hurry, but no one was successful either on the first or second day. They could all talk well enough when they were out in the street, but as soon as they came inside the palace gates and saw the guard richly dressed in silver, and the lackeys in gold on the staircase, and the large illuminated saloons, then they were abashed, and when they stood before the throne on which the princess was sitting, all they could do was to repeat the last word they had uttered, and to hear it again did not interest her very much. It was just as if the people within were under a charm, and had fallen into a trance till they came out again into the street. For then, oh then, they could chatter enough. There was a whole row of them standing from the town gates to the palace. I was there myself to look, said the raven. They grew hungry and thirsty, but from the palace they got nothing whatever, not even a glass of water. Some of the cleverest, it is true, had taken bread and butter with them, but none shared it with his neighbor, for each thought, let him look hungry, and then the princess won't have him. But Kay, little Kay, said Gerda, when did he come? Was he among the number? Patience, patience, we are just come to him. It was on the third day when a little personage without horse or equipage came marching right boldly up to the palace. His eyes shone like yours. He had beautiful long hair, but his clothes were very shabby. That was Kay, cried Gerda with a voice of delight. Oh, now I've found him. And she clapped her hands for joy. He had a little knapsack at his back, said the raven. No, that was certainly his sledge, said Gerda, for when he went away he took his sledge with him. That may be, said the raven. I did not examine him so minutely, but I know from my tame sweetheart that when he came into the courtyard of the palace and saw the bodyguard in silver, the lackeys on the staircase, he was not the least abashed. He nodded and said to them, It must be very tiresome to stand on the stairs. For my part, I shall go in. The saloons were gleaming with lustres. Privy councillors and excellencies were walking about barefooted and wore gold keys. It was enough to make anyone feel uncomfortable. His boots creaked too, so loudly, but still he was not at all afraid. That's Kay for certain, said Gerda. I know he had on new boots. I have heard them creaking in Grandmamma's room. Yes, they creaked, said the raven. And on he went boldly up to the princess, who was sitting on a pearl as large as a spinning wheel. All the ladies of the court, with their attendants and attendants, and all the cavaliers, with their gentlemen and gentlemen's gentlemen, stood round. And the nearer they stood to the door, the prouder they looked. It was hardly possible to look at the gentleman's gentleman, so very haughtily did he stand in the doorway. It must have been terrible, said little Gerda. And did Kay get the princess? Were I not a raven, I should have taken the princess myself, although I am promised. It is said he spoke as well as I speak when I talk raven language. This I learned from my tame sweetheart. He was bold and nicely behaved. He had not come to woo the princess, but only to hear her wisdom. She pleased him, and he pleased her. Yes, yes, for certain that was Kay, said Gerda. He was so clever, he could reckon fractions in his head. Oh, won't you take me to the palace? "That is very easily said," answered the raven. "But how are we to manage it? I'll speak to my tame sweetheart about it. She must advise us. For so much I must tell you, such a little girl as you are will never get permission to enter." "Oh, yes, I shall," said Gerda. "When Kay hears that I am here, he will come out directly to fetch me." "Wait for me here on these steps," said the raven. He moved his head backwards and forwards and flew away. The evening was closing in when the raven returned. "Caw, caw," said he. "She sends you her compliments, and here is a roll for you. She took it out of the kitchen where there is bread enough. You are hungry, no doubt. It is not possible for you to enter the palace, for you are barefooted. The guards in silver and the lackeys in gold would not allow it, but do not cry. You shall come in still. My sweetheart knows a little back stair that leads to the bedchamber, and she knows where she can get the key of it." And they went into the garden in the large avenue, where one leaf was falling after the other. And when the lights in the palace had all gradually disappeared, the raven led little Gerda to the back door, which stood half open. Oh, how Gerda's heart beat with anxiety and longing. It was just as if she had been about to do something wrong, and yet she only wanted to know if little Kay was there. Yes, he must be there. She called to mind his intelligent eyes and his long hair so vividly she could quite see him as he used to laugh when they were sitting under the roses at home. He will, no doubt, be glad to see you, to hear what a long way you have come for his sake, to know how unhappy all at home were when he did not come back. Oh, what a fright and a joy it was! They were now on the stairs. A single lamp was burning there, and on the floor stood the tame raven, turning her head on every side and looking at Gerda, who bowed as her grandmother had taught her to do. "My intended has told me so much good of you, my dear young lady," said the tame raven. "Your tale is very affecting. If you will take the lamp, I will go before. We will go straight on, for we shall meet no one." "I think there is somebody just behind us," said Gerda, and something rushed past. It was like shadowy figures on the wall, horses with flowing manes and thin legs, huntsmen, ladies and gentlemen on horseback. "They are only dreams," said the raven. "They come to fetch the thoughts of the high personages to the chase. 'Tis well, for now you can observe them in bed all the better. But let me find, when you enjoy honor and distinction, that you possess a grateful heart." "Tut, that's not worth talking about," said the raven of the woods. They now entered the first saloon, which was of rose-colored satin, with artificial flowers on the wall. Here the dreams were rushing past, but they hastened by so quickly that Gerda could not see the high personages. One hall was more magnificent than the other. One might indeed well be abashed, and at last they came into the bedchamber. The ceiling of the room resembled a large palm tree with leaves of glass, of costly glass, and in the middle, from a thick golden stem, hung 2 beds, each of which resembled a lily. One was white, and in this lay the princess. The other was red, and it was here that Gerda was to look for little Kay. She bent back one of the red leaves and saw a brown neck. Oh, that was Kay. She called him quite loud by name, held the lamp towards him. The dreams rushed back again into the chamber. He awoke, turned his head, and it was not little Kay. The prince was only like him about the neck, but he was young and handsome. And out of the white lily leaves the princess peeped too, and asked what was the matter. Then little Gerda cried, and told her whole history, and all that the ravens had done for her. "Poor little thing," said the prince and the princess. They praised the ravens very much, and told them they were not at all angry with them, but they were not to do so again. However, they should have a reward. "Will you fly about here at liberty?" asked the princess. "Or would you like to have a fixed appointment as court ravens, with all the broken bits from the kitchen?" And both the ravens nodded and begged for a fixed appointment, for they thought of their old age, and said, "It is a good thing to have a provision for our old days." And the prince got up and let Gerda sleep in his bed, and more than this he could not do. She folded her little hands and thought, "How good men and animals are." And she then fell asleep and slept soundly. All the dreams flew in again, and they now looked like the angels. They drew a little sledge, in which little Kay sat and nodded his head. But the whole was only a dream, and therefore it all vanished as soon as she awoke. The next day she was dressed from head to foot in silk and velvet. They offered to let her stay at the palace and lead a happy life, but she begged to have a little carriage with a horse in front, and for a small pair of shoes. Then, she said, she would again go forth in the wide world and look for Kay. Shoes and a muff were given her. She was, too, dressed very nicely, and when she was about to set off, a new carriage stopped before the door. It was of pure gold, and the arms of the prince and princess shone like a star upon it. The coachman, the footmen, and the outriders. For outriders were there, too. All wore golden crowns. The prince and the princess assisted her into the carriage themselves, and wished her all success. The Raven of the Woods, who was now married, accompanied her for the first 3 miles. He sat beside Gerda, for he could not bear riding backwards. The other raven stood in the doorway and flapped her wings. She could not accompany Gerda, because she suffered from headache since she had had a fixed appointment and ate so much. The carriage was lined inside with sugar plums, and in the seats were fruits and gingerbread. "Farewell, farewell," cried prince and princess, and Gerda wept, and the raven wept. Thus passed the first miles, and then the raven bade her farewell, and this was the most painful separation of all. He flew into a tree and beat his black wings as long as he could see the carriage that shone from afar like a sunbeam. 5th story, The Little Robber Maiden. They drove through the dark wood, but the carriage shone like a torch, and it dazzled the eyes of the robbers so that they could not bear to look at it. "'Tis gold, 'tis gold, they cried, and they rushed forward, seized the horses, knocked down the little postilion, the coachman, and the servants, and pulled little Gerda out of the carriage. "How plump, how beautiful she is! She must have been fed on nut kernels," said the old female robber, who had a long, scrubby beard and bushy eyebrows that hung down over her eyes. "She is as good as a fatted lamb. How nice she will be." And then she drew out a knife, the blade of which shone so that it was quite dreadful to behold. "Oh!" cried the woman at the same moment. She had been bitten in the ear by her own little daughter, who hung at her back, and who was so wild and unmanageable that it was quite amusing to see her. "You naughty child," said the mother, and now she had not time to kill Gerda. "She shall play with me," said the little robber child. "She shall give me her muff and her pretty frock. She shall sleep in my bed." Yes, and then she gave her mother another bite, so that she jumped and ran round with the pain. And the robbers laughed and said, "Look, how she is dancing with the little one." "I will go into the carriage," said the little robber maiden. and she would have her will, for she was very spoiled and very headstrong. She and Gerda got in, and then away they drove over the stumps of felled trees, deeper and deeper into the woods. The little robber maiden was as tall as Gerda, but stronger, broader-shouldered, and of dark complexion. Her eyes were quite black. They looked almost melancholy. She embraced little Gerda and said, "They shall not kill you as long as I am not displeased with you. You are doubtless a princess?" "No," said little Gerda, who then related all that had happened to her, and how much she cared about little Kay. The little robber maiden looked at her with a serious air, nodded her head slightly, and said, "They shall not kill you, even if I am angry with you. Then I will do it myself." And she dried Gerda's eyes, and put both her hands in the handsome muff, which was so soft and warm. At length the carriage stopped. They were in the midst of the courtyard of a robber's castle. It was full of cracks from top to bottom, and out of the openings magpies and rooks were flying, and the great bulldogs, each of which looked as if he could swallow a man, jumped up, but they did not bark, for that was forbidden. In the midst of the large, old, smoking hall burnt a great fire on the stone floor. The smoke disappeared under the stones and had to seek its own egress. In an immense cauldron, soup was boiling, and rabbits and hares were being roasted on a spit. "You shall sleep with me tonight, with all my animals," said the little robber maiden. They had something to eat and drink, and then went into a corner where straw and carpets were lying. Beside them, on laths and perches, sat nearly 100 pigeons, all asleep, seemingly, but yet they moved a little when the robber maiden came. "They are all mine," said she, at the same time seizing one that was next to her by the legs and shaking it so that its wings fluttered. "Kiss it," cried the little girl, and flung the pigeon in Gerda's face. "Up there is the rabble of the wood," continued she, pointing to several laths which were fastened before a hole high up in the wall. "That's the rabble. They would all fly away immediately if they were not well fastened in. And here is my dear old back." And she laid hold of the horns of a reindeer that had a bright copper ring round its neck and was tethered to the spot. "We are obliged to lock this fellow in too, or he would make his escape. Every evening I tickle his neck with my sharp knife. He is so frightened at it." And the little girl drew forth a long knife from a crack in the wall and let it glide over the reindeer's neck. The poor animal kicked. The girl laughed and pulled Gerda into bed with her. "Do you intend to keep your knife while you sleep?" asked Gerda, looking at it rather fearfully. "I always sleep with the knife," said the little robber maiden. "There is no knowing what may happen, but tell me now, once more, all about little Kay, and why you have started off in the wide world alone." And Gerda related all, from the very beginning. The wood pigeons cooed above in their cage, and the others slept. The little robber maiden wound her arm round Gerda's neck, held the knife in the other hand, and snored so loud that everybody could hear her. But Gerda could not close her eyes, for she did not know whether she was to live or die. The robbers sat round the fire, sang and drank, and the old female robber jumped about so that it was quite dreadful for Gerda to see her. Then the wood pigeons said, "Coo, cool, we have seen little Kay. A white hen carries his sledge. He himself sat in the carriage of the Snow Queen, who passed here down just over the wood as we lay in our nest. She blew upon us, young ones, and all died except we two. Coo, coo." "What is that you say up there?" cried little Gerda. "Where did the Snow Queen go to? Do you know anything about it?" "She is no doubt gone to Lapland, for there is always snow and ice there. Only ask the reindeer, who is tethered there. Ice and snow is there. There it is, glorious and beautiful," said the reindeer. "One can spring about in the large, shining valleys. The Snow Queen has her summer tent there, but her fixed abode is high up towards the North Pole on the island called Spitzbergen." "Oh, Kay, poor little Kay," sighed Gerda. "Do you choose to be quiet?" said the robber maiden. "If you don't, I shall make you." In the morning, Gerda told her all that the wood pigeons had said, and the little maiden looked very serious, but she nodded her head and said, "That's no matter. That's no matter. Do you know where Lapland lies?" she asked of the reindeer. "Who should know better than I?" said the animal, and his eyes rolled in his head. "I was born and bred there. There I leapt about on the fields of snow." "Listen," said the robber maiden to Gerda. "You see that the men are gone, but my mother is still here and will remain. However, towards morning she takes a draught out of the large flask, and then she sleeps a little. Then I will do something for you." She now jumped out of bed, flew to her mother, with her arms round her neck and pulling her by the beard, said, "Good morrow, my own sweet nanny goat of a mother." And her mother took hold of her nose and pinched it till it was red and blue. But this was all done out of pure love. When the mother had taken a sup at her flask and was having a nap, the little robber maiden went to the reindeer and said, "I should very much like to give you still many a tickling with the sharp knife, for then you are so amusing. However, I will untether you and help you out so that you may go back to Lapland. But you must make good use of your legs, and take this little girl for me to the palace of the Snow Queen, where her playfellow is. You have heard, I suppose, all she said, for she spoke loud enough, and you were listening." The reindeer gave a bound for joy. The robber maiden lifted up little Gerda and took the precaution to bind her fast on the reindeer's back. She even gave her a small cushion to sit on. "Here are your worsted leggins, for it will be cold, but the muff I shall keep for myself, for it is so very pretty. But I do not wish you to be cold. Here is a pair of lined gloves of my mother's. They just reach up to your elbow. On with them. Now you look about the hands just like my ugly old mother." And Gerda wept for joy. "I can't bear to see you fretting," said the little robber maiden. "This is just the time when you ought to look pleased. Here are 2 loaves and a ham for you, so that you won't starve." The bread and the meat were fastened to the reindeer's back. The little maiden opened the door, called in all the dogs, and then, with her knife, cut the rope that fastened the animal, and said to him, "Now off with you, but take good care of the little girl." And Gerda stretched out her hands with the large wadded gloves towards the robber maiden, and said, "Farewell." And the reindeer flew on over bush and bramble through the great wood, over moor and heath, as fast as he could go. "Didsa, didsa," was heard in the sky. It was just as if somebody was sneezing. "These are my old northern lights," said the reindeer. "Look how they gleam." And on he now sped still quicker. Day and night on he went. The loaves were consumed, and the ham too, and now they were in Lapland. 6th story. The Lapland Woman and the Finland Woman. Suddenly they stopped before a little house which looked very miserable. The roof reached to the ground, and the door was so low that the family were obliged to creep upon their stomachs when they went in or out. Nobody was at home except an old Lapland woman who was dressing fish by the light of an oil lamp. And the reindeer told her the whole of Gerda's history, but first of all his own, for that seemed to him of much greater importance. Gerda was so chilled that she could not speak. "Poor thing," said the Lapland woman, "you have far to run still. You have more than 100 miles to go before you get to Finland. There the Snow Queen has her country house and burns blue lights every evening. I will give you a few words from me, which I will write on a dried haberdine. For paper I have none. This you can take with you to the Finland woman, and she will be able to give you more information than I can." When Gerda had warmed herself and had eaten and drunk, the Lapland woman wrote a few words on a dried haberdine, begged Gerda to take care of them, put her on the reindeer, bound her fast, and away sprang the animal. "Didsa, Didsa," was again heard in the air. The most charming blue lights burned the whole night in the sky, and at last they came to Finland. They knocked at the chimney of the Finland woman, for as to a door, she had none. There was such a heat inside that the Finland woman herself went about almost naked. She was diminutive and dirty. She immediately loosened little Gerda's clothes, pulled off her thick gloves and boots, for otherwise the heat would have been too great, and after laying a piece of ice on the reindeer's head, read what was written on the fish skin. She read it 3 times. She then knew it by heart, so she put the fish into the cupboard, for it might very well be eaten, and she never threw anything away. Then the reindeer related his own story first, and afterwards that of little Gerda, and the Finland woman winked her eyes, but said nothing. "You are so clever," said the reindeer. "You can, I know, twist all the winds of the world together in a knot. If the seaman loosens one knot, then he has a good wind. If a second, then it blows pretty stiffly. If he undoes the third and fourth, then it rages so that the forests are upturned. Will you give the little maiden a potion, that she may possess the strength of 12 men and vanquish the Snow Queen?" "The strength of 12 men," you said the Finland woman. "Much good that would be." Then she went to a cupboard and drew out a large skin rolled up. When she had unrolled it, strange characters were to be seen written thereon, and the Finland woman read at such a rate that the perspiration trickled down her forehead. But the reindeer begged so hard for little Gerda, and Gerda looked so imploringly with tearful eyes at the Finland woman, that she winked and drew the reindeer aside into a corner, where they whispered together, while the animal got some fresh ice put on his head. "'Tis true, little Kay is at the Snow Queen's, and finds everything there quite to his taste, and he thinks it the very best place in the world. But the reason of that is, he has a splinter of glass in his eye and in his heart. These must be got out first, otherwise he will never go back to mankind, and the Snow Queen will retain her power over him. But can you give little Gerda nothing to take which will endue her with power over the whole? I can give her no more power than what she has already. Don't you see how great it is? Don't you see how men and animals are forced to serve her? How well she gets through the world barefooted. She must not hear of her power from us. That power lies in her heart, because she is a sweet and innocent child. If she cannot get to the Snow Queen by herself and rid little Kay of the glass, we cannot help her. 2 miles hence the garden of the Snow Queen begins. Thither you may carry the little girl. Set her down by the large bush with red berries standing in the snow. Don't stay talking, but hasten back as fast as possible." And now the Finland woman placed little Gerda on the reindeer's back, and off he ran with all imaginable speed. "Oh, I have not got my boots. I have not brought my gloves," cried little Gerda. She remarked she was without them from the cutting frost, but the reindeer dared not stand still. On he ran till he came to the great bush with the red berries, and there he set Gerda down, kissed her mouth, while large bright tears flowed from the animal's eyes, and then back he went as fast as possible. There stood poor Gerda now, without shoes or gloves, in the very middle of dreadful, icy Finland. She ran on as fast as she could. There then came a whole regiment of snowflakes, but they did not fall from above, and they were quite bright and shining from the aurora borealis. The flakes ran along the ground, and the nearer they came, the larger they grew. Gerda well remembered how large and strange the snowflakes appeared when she once saw them through a magnifying glass. But now they were large and terrific in another manner. They were all alive. They were the outposts of the Snow Queen. They had the most wondrous shapes. Some looked like large, ugly porcupines, others like snakes knotted together, with their heads sticking out, and others again like small, fat bears, with the hair standing on end. All were of dazzling whiteness. All were living snowflakes. Little Gerda repeated the Lord's Prayer. The cold was so intense that she could see her own breath, which came like smoke out of her mouth. It grew thicker and thicker, and took the form of little angels that grew more and more when they touched the earth. All had helms on their heads, and lances and shields in their hands. They increased in numbers. And when Gerda had finished the Lord's Prayer, she was surrounded by a whole legion. They thrust at the horrid snowflakes with their spears, so that they flew into 1,000 pieces. And little Gerda walked on bravely and in security. The angels patted her hands and feet, and then she felt the cold less, and went on quickly towards the palace of the Snow Queen. But now we shall see how Kay fared. He never thought of Gerda, and least of all that she was standing before the palace. 7th story. What took place in the palace of the Snow Queen, and what happened afterward. The walls of the palace were of driving snow, and the windows and doors of cutting winds. There were more than 100 halls there, according as the snow was driven by the winds. The largest was many miles in extent. All were lighted up by the powerful aurora borealis, and all were so large, so empty, so icy cold, and so resplendent. Mirth never reigned there. There was never even a little bear ball, with the storm for music, while the polar bears went on their hind legs and showed off their steps. Never a little tea party of white, young lady foxes. Vast, cold, and empty were the halls of the Snow Queen. The northern lights shone with such precision that one could tell exactly when they were at their highest or lowest degree of brightness. In the middle of the empty, endless hall of snow was a frozen lake. It was cracked in 1,000 pieces, but each piece was so like the other that it seemed the work of a cunning artificer. In the middle of this lake sat the Snow Queen, when she was at home, and then she said she was sitting in the mirror of understanding, and that this was the only one and the best thing in the world. Little Kay was quite blue, yes, nearly black with cold, but he did not observe it, for she had kissed away all feeling of cold from his body, and his heart was a lump of ice. He was dragging along some pointed, flat pieces of ice, which he laid together in all possible ways. for he wanted to make something with them, just as we have little flat pieces of wood to make geometrical figures with, called the Chinese puzzle. Kay made all sorts of figures, the most complicated, for it was an ice puzzle for the understanding. In his eyes the figures were extraordinarily beautiful and of the utmost importance, for the bit of glass which was in his eye caused this. He found whole figures which represented a written word, but he never could manage to represent just the word he wanted. That word was eternity. And the Snow Queen had said, "If you can discover that figure, you shall be your own master, and I will make you a present of the whole world and a pair of new skates." But he could not find it out. "I am going now to warm lands," said the Snow Queen. "I must have a look down into the black cauldrons." It was the volcanoes Vesuvius and Etna that she meant. "I will just give them a coating of white, for that is as it ought to be. Besides, it is good for the oranges and the grapes." And then away she flew, and Kay sat quite alone in the empty halls of ice that were miles long, and looked at the blocks of ice, and thought, till his skull was almost cracked. There he sat quite benumbed and motionless. One would have imagined he was frozen to death. Suddenly little Gerda stepped through the great portal into the palace. The gate was formed of cutting winds, but Gerda repeated her evening prayer, and the winds were laid as though they slept. And the little maiden entered the vast, empty, cold halls. There she beheld Kay. She recognized him, flew to embrace him, and cried out, her arms firmly holding him the while. "Kay, sweet little Kay, have I then found you at last?" But he sat quite still, benumbed and cold. Then little Gerda shed burning tears, and they fell on his bosom. They penetrated to his heart. They thawed the lumps of ice and consumed the splinters of the looking-glass. He looked at her, and she sang the hymn. "The rose in the valley is blooming so sweet, and angels descend there the children to greet." Hereupon Kay burst into tears. He wept so much that the splinter rolled out of his eye, and he recognized her and shouted, "Gerda, sweet little Gerda, where have you been so long, and where have I been?" He looked round him. "How cold it is here," said he, "how empty and cold." And he held fast by Gerda, who laughed and wept for joy. It was so beautiful that even the blocks of ice danced about for joy. And when they were tired and laid themselves down, they formed exactly the letters which the Snow Queen had told him to find out. So now he was his own master, and he would have the whole world and a pair of new skates into the bargain. Gerda kissed his cheeks, and they grew quite blooming. She kissed his eyes, and they shone like her own. She kissed his hands and feet, and he was again well and merry. The Snow Queen might come back as soon as she liked. There stood his discharge written in resplendent masses of ice. They took each other by the hand and wandered forth out of the large hall. They talked of their old grandmother and of the roses upon the roof, and wherever they went, the winds ceased raging, and the sun burst forth. And when they reached the bush with the red berries, they found the reindeer waiting for them. He had brought another, a young one, with him, whose udder was filled with milk, which he gave to the little ones, and kissed their lips. They then carried Kay and Gerda, first to the Finland woman, where they warmed themselves in the warm room, and learned what they were to do on their journey home. And they went to the Lapland woman, who made some new clothes for them, and repaired their sledges. The reindeer and the young hind leaped along beside them, and accompanied them to the boundary of the country. Here the first vegetation peeped forth. Here Kay and Gerda took leave of the Lapland woman. "Farewell, farewell," they all said, and the first green buds appeared. The first little birds began to chirrup, and out of the wood came, riding on a magnificent horse, which Gerda knew it was one of the leaders in the golden carriage, a young damsel with a bright red cap on her head and armed with pistols. It was the little robber maiden who, tired of being at home, had determined to make a journey to the north, and afterwards in another direction, if that did not please her. She recognized Gerda immediately, and Gerda knew her too. It was a joyful meeting. "You are a fine fellow for tramping about," said she to little Kay. "I should like to know, Faith, if you deserve that one should run from one end of the world to the other for your sake." But Gerda patted her cheeks and inquired for the prince and princess. "They are gone abroad," said the other. "But the raven?" asked little Gerda. "Oh, the raven is dead," she answered. "His tame sweetheart is a widow, and wears a bit of black worsted round her leg. She laments most piteously, but it's all mere talk and stuff. Now tell me what you've been doing, and how you managed to catch him." And Gerda and Kay both told their story. And "Schnipp, schnapp, schnurre, basselurre," said the robber maiden. And she took the hands of each, and promised that if she should some day pass through the town where they lived, she would come and visit them. And then away she rode. Kay and Gerda took each other's hand. It was lovely spring weather, with abundance of flowers and of verdure. The church bells rang, and the children recognized the high towers and the large town. It was that in which they dwelt. They entered and hastened up to their grandmother's room, where everything was standing as formerly. The clock said, "Tick-tack," and the finger moved round. But as they entered, they remarked that they were now grown up. The roses on the leads hung blooming in at the open window. There stood the little children's chairs, and Kay and Gerda sat down on them, holding each other by the hand. They both had forgotten the cold, empty splendor of the Snow Queen, as though it had been a dream. The grandmother sat in the bright sunshine and read aloud from the Bible. "Unless ye become as little children, ye cannot enter the kingdom of heaven." And Kay and Gerda looked in each other's eyes, and all at once they understood the old hymn. "The rose in the valley is blooming so sweet, and angels descend there the children to greet." There sat the two grown-up persons, grown up and yet children, children at least in heart, and it was summertime. Summer, glorious summer. The last dream of the old oak. In the forest, high up on the steep shore, and not far from the open sea-coast, stood a very old oak tree. It was just 365 years old, but that long time was to the tree as the same number of days might be to us. We wake by day and sleep by night, and then we have our dreams. It is different with the tree. It is obliged to keep awake through 3 seasons of the year, and does not get any sleep till winter comes. Winter is its time for rest, its night after the long day of spring, summer, and autumn. On many a warm summer, the ephemera, the flies that exist for only a day, had fluttered about the old oak, enjoyed life, and felt happy, and if, for a moment, one of the tiny creatures rested on one of his large, fresh leaves, the tree would always say, "Poor little creature, your whole life consists only of a single day. How very short. It must be quite melancholy." "Melancholy? What do you mean?" the little creature would always reply. Everything around me is so wonderfully bright and warm and beautiful that it makes me joyous. But only for one day, and then it is all over." "Over," repeated the fly. "What is the meaning of all over? Are you all over too?" "No, I shall very likely live for thousands of your days, and my day is whole seasons long. Indeed, it is so long that you could never reckon it out." "No? Then I don't understand you. You may have thousands of my days, but I have thousands of moments in which I can be merry and happy. Does all the beauty of the world cease when you die?" "No," replied the tree. "It will certainly last much longer, infinitely longer than I can even think of." "Well then," said the little fly, "we have the same time to live, only we reckon differently." And the little creature danced and floated in the air, rejoicing in her delicate wings of gauze and velvet, rejoicing in the balmy breezes, laden with the fragrance of clover fields and wild roses, elder blossoms and honeysuckle, from the garden hedges, wild thyme, primroses, and mint. And the scent of all these was so strong that the perfume almost intoxicated the little fly. The long and beautiful day had been so full of joy and sweet delights that when the sun sank low, it felt tired of all its happiness and enjoyment. Its wings could sustain it no longer, and gently and slowly it glided down upon the soft waving blades of grass, nodded its little head as well as it could nod, and slept peacefully and sweetly. The fly was dead. "Poor little ephemera," said the oak. "What a terribly short life." And so, on every summer day the dance was repeated, the same questions asked, and the same answers given. The same thing was continued through many generations of ephemera. All of them felt equally merry and equally happy. The oak remained awake through the morning of spring, the noon of summer, and the evening of autumn. Its time of rest, its night drew nigh. Winter was coming. Already the storms were singing, "Good night, good night. Here fell a leaf, and there fell a leaf. We will rock you and lull you. Go to sleep, go to sleep. We will sing you to sleep and shake you to sleep, and it will do your old twigs good. They will even crackle with pleasure. Sleep sweetly, sleep sweetly. It is your 365th night. Correctly speaking, you are but a youngster in the world. Sleep sweetly. The clouds will drop snow upon you, which will be quite a coverlid, warm and sheltering to your feet. Sweet sleep to you, and pleasant dreams." And there stood the oak, stripped of all its leaves, left to rest during the whole of a long winter, and to dream many dreams of events that had happened in its life, as in the dreams of men. The great tree had once been small. Indeed, in its cradle, it had been an acorn. According to human computation, it was now in the 4th century of its existence. It was the largest and best tree in the forest. Its summit towered above all the other trees, and could be seen far out at sea, so that it served as a landmark to the sailors. It had no idea how many eyes looked eagerly for it. In its topmost branches the wood pigeon built her nest, and the cuckoo carried out his usual vocal performances, and his well-known notes echoed amid the boughs. And in autumn, when the leaves looked like beaten copper plates, the birds of passage would come and rest upon the branches before taking their flight across the sea. But now it was winter. The tree stood leafless, so that everyone could see how crooked and bent were the branches that sprang forth from the trunk. Crows and rooks came by turns and sat on them, and talked of the hard times which were beginning, and how difficult it was in winter to obtain food. It was just about holy Christmas time that the tree dreamed a dream. The tree had, doubtless, a kind of feeling that the festive time had arrived, and in his dream fancied he heard the bells ringing from all the churches round. And yet it seemed to him to be a beautiful summer's day, mild and warm. His mighty summit was crowned with spreading fresh green foliage. The sunbeams played among the leaves and branches, and the air was full of fragrance from herb and blossom. Painted butterflies chased each other. The summer flies danced around him, as if the world had been created merely for them to dance and be merry in. All that had happened to the tree during every year of his life seemed to pass before him, as in a festive procession. He saw the knights of olden times and noble ladies ride by through the wood on their gallant steeds, with plumes waving in their hats and falcons on their wrists. The hunting horn sounded, and the dogs barked. He saw hostile warriors in colored dresses and glittering armor, with spear and halberd, pitching their tents and anon striking them. The watchfires again blazed, and men sang and slept under the hospitable shelter of the tree. He saw lovers meet in quiet happiness near him in the moonshine, and carve the initials of their names in the grayish-green bark on his trunk. Once, but long years had intervened since then, guitars and Aeolian harps had been hung on his boughs by merry travelers. Now they seemed to hang there again, and he could hear their marvelous tones. The wood pigeons cooed as if to explain the feelings of the tree, and the cuckoo called out to tell him how many summer days he had yet to live. Then it seemed as if new life was thrilling. Through every fiber of root and stem and leaf, rising even to the highest branches, the tree felt itself stretching and spreading out, while through the root beneath the earth ran the warm vigor of life. As he grew higher and still higher, with increased strength, his topmost boughs became broader and fuller, and in proportion to his growth, so was his self-satisfaction increased, and with it arose a joyous longing to grow higher and higher, to reach even to the warm, bright sun itself. Already had his topmost branches pierced the clouds, which floated beneath them like troops of birds of passage or large white swans. Every leaf seemed gifted with sight, as if it possessed eyes to see. The stars became visible in broad daylight, large and sparkling, like clear and gentle eyes. They recalled to the memory the well-known look in the eyes of a child, or in the eyes of lovers who had once met beneath the branches of the old oak. These were wonderful and happy moments for the old tree, full of peace and joy. And yet, amidst all this happiness, the tree felt a yearning, longing desire that all the other trees, bushes, herbs, and flowers beneath him might be able also to rise higher, as he had done, and to see all this splendor and experience the same happiness. The grand, majestic oak could not be quite happy in the midst of his enjoyment, while all the rest, both great and small, were not with him. And this feeling of yearning trembled through every branch, through every leaf, as warmly and fervently as if they had been the fibers of a human heart. The summit of the tree waved to and fro, and bent downwards as if in his silent longing he sought for something. Then there came to him the fragrance of thyme, followed by the more powerful scent of honeysuckle and violets, and he fancied he heard the note of the cuckoo. At length his longing was satisfied. Up through the clouds came the green summits of the forest trees, and beneath him the oak saw them rising and growing higher and higher. Bush and herb shot upward, and some even tore themselves up by the roots to rise more quickly. The birch tree was the quickest of all. Like a lightning flash, the slender stem shot upwards in a zigzag line, the branches spreading around it like green gauze and banners. Every native of the wood, even to the brown and feathery rushes, grew with the rest, while the birds ascended with the melody of song. On a blade of grass that fluttered in the air like a long green ribbon sat a grasshopper, cleaning his wings with his legs. May beetles hummed, the bees murmured, the birds sang, each in his own way. The air was filled with the sounds of song and gladness. "But where is the little blue flower that grows by the water?" asked the oak, and the purple bellflower and the daisy. You see, the oak wanted to have them all with him. "Here we are here," sounded in voice and song. But the beautiful time of last summer, where is that? And the lilies of the valley, which last year covered the earth with their bloom, and the wild apple tree with its lovely blossoms, and all the glory of the wood, which has flourished year after year. Even what may have but now sprouted forth could be with us here. We are here, sounded voices higher in the air, as if they had flown there beforehand. "Why, this is beautiful, too beautiful to be believed," said the oak in a joyful tone. "I have them all here, both great and small. Not one has been forgotten. Can such happiness be imagined? It seemed almost impossible. In heaven with the eternal God, it can be imagined, and it is possible," sounded the reply through the air. And the old tree, as it still grew upwards and onwards, felt that his roots were loosening themselves from the earth. "It is right so, it is best," said the tree. "No fetters hold me now. I can fly up to the very highest point in light and glory, and all I love are with me, both small and great. All are here." Such was the dream of the old oak, and while he dreamed, a mighty storm came rushing over land and sea at the holy Christmas time. The sea rolled in great billows towards the shore. There was a cracking and crushing heard in the tree. The root was torn from the ground just at the moment when in his dream he fancied it was being loosened from the earth. He fell. His 365 years were passed as the single day of the ephemera. On the morning of Christmas Day, when the sun rose, the storm had ceased. From all the churches sounded the festive bells, and from every hearth, even of the smallest hut, rose the smoke into the blue sky, like the smoke from the festive thank-offerings on the Druids' altars. The sea gradually became calm, and on board a great ship that had withstood the tempest during the night, all the flags were displayed as a token of joy and festivity. "The tree is down, the old oak, our landmark on the coast," exclaimed the sailors. "It must have fallen in the storm of last night. Who can replace it? Alas, no one." This was a funeral oration over the old tree, short but well meant. There it lay, stretched on the snow-covered shore, and over it sounded the notes of a song from the ship, a song of Christmas joy and of the redemption of the soul of man and of eternal life through Christ's atoning blood. A sing aloud on the happy morn, all is fulfilled, for Christ is born. With songs of joy let us loudly sing, hallelujahs to Christ our King. Thus sounded the old Christmas carol, and everyone on board the ship felt his thoughts elevated through the song and the prayer, even as the old tree had felt lifted up in its last, its beautiful dream on that Christmas morn. The storm shifts the signboards. In olden days, when Grandfather was just a little boy and wore red trousers, a red jacket, a sash around his waist, and a feather in his cap, for that's the way little boys dressed in his childhood when they wore their best clothes, so many things were different from nowadays. There were often street pageants, which we don't see now, for they have been done away with, because they became old-fashioned. But it's fun to hear Grandfather tell about them. It must have been quite a show to see the shoemakers move their signboard when they changed to a new guild hall. A big boot and a two-headed eagle were painted on their waving silken banner. The youngest journeyman carried the welcome cup and the guild chest and had red and white ribbons dangling from their shirt sleeves. The older ones wore naked swords with lemons stuck on the points. They had a full band, and the best of their instruments was the bird. As Grandfather called the long pole, with the half moon and all sorts of sounding dingle-dangle things on it. Real Turkish music. It was lifted up and swung, and it was dazzling to the eyes when the sun shone on all that polished gold and silver and brass. In front of the procession ran a harlequin in clothes made of many colored patches, with a black face and with bells on his head, like a sleigh horse. He struck the people with his wand, which made a noise without hurting, and the people pushed against each other to move back and forth. Little boys and girls fell over their own feet right into the gutters. Old women elbowed their way along, looking sour and scolding. Some people laughed and some people chatted. There were spectators on the steps and in the windows, and yes, even on the roofs. The sun shone, a little rain fell on the people now and then, but that was a good thing for the farmers. And when finally they became wet through, that was a real blessing to the country. Ah, what stories Grandfather could tell. When he was a little boy, he had seen all that grand show at the height of its splendor. The oldest guild journeyman made a speech from the scaffold where the signboard was hung. It was in verse, just like poetry, which, indeed, it was. There had been 3 of them working on it, and before writing it, they had drunk a whole bowl of punch so that it would be really good. And the people cheered the speech, but still more they cheered the harlequin when he appeared on the scaffold and mocked the speaker. The clown cut his capers so gaily and drank punch out of schnapps glasses, which he then threw out among the people, who caught them in the air. Grandfather had one of them, which the plasterer had caught and presented to him. Yes, it was fun. And at last the signboard hung, decked with flowers and wreaths, on the new guild hall. You never forget a sight like that, no matter how old you grow, Grandfather said. He himself never forgot it, though afterward he saw many things of pomp and splendor, and could tell about them. But the funniest thing of all was when he told about the moving of the signboards in the big town. Grandfather had gone there with his parents when he was a little boy, and that was the first time he had seen the largest town in the country. There were so many people in the streets that he thought the signboards were going to be moved, and there were many signboards to move. If these signs had been hung up inside instead of out of doors, they would have been filled up hundreds of rooms. There were all kinds of garments painted on the sign at the tailor's. He could change people from uncouth to genteel. There were signboards of tobacconists, with the most cunning little boys smoking cigars, just as in real life. There were signs with butter and salted herrings, ministers' ruffs and coffins, and signboards that just carried inscriptions and announcements. Indeed, one could spend a whole day going up and down the streets and looking at the pictures, and at the same time, you could learn what sort of people lived inside the houses, for they had hung their own signs outside. "That is a very good thing," Grandfather said. "In a large town, it is instructive to know who lives in all the houses. But then, something was about to happen to the signboards, just as Grandfather came to town. He has told me about it himself, and there wasn't then any twinkle in his eye, as Mother used to say there was. When he was fooling me, he looked quite trustworthy. That first night he came to the big town, the weather was worse than any we ever have read about in the papers, a storm such as there had never been within man's memory. All the air was full of roof tiles, old wooden fences were blown over, a wheelbarrow even ran for its life by itself along the street. The wind howled in the air, it whistled, and it shook everything. It was indeed a terrible storm. The water in the canal ran over the banks, not knowing where it belonged. The storm swept over the town, carrying the chimneys with it. More than one old, proud church tower bent, and has never been quite straight since. A sentry box stood outside the house of the honest old fire chief, whose engine was always the last one at the fire. The storm begrudged him that little box and flung it down the steps and rolled it along the street until, strangely enough, it arose and remained upright before the house of the poor carpenter who had saved the lives of 3 people at the last fire. But the sentry box didn't give that a thought. The barber's signboard, a large brass dish, was torn off and carried across into the counselor's window. All the neighbors said this seemed almost like malice, for they, like the most intimate lady friends of the family, called the mistress the razor. She was so sharp and knew more about people than they knew about themselves. A sign with a dried codfish drawn on it flew over to the door of a newspaper writer. That was a pretty poor joke on the part of the storm. It probably didn't remember that a newspaper writer isn't the sort of person to be joked about. He is a king in his own paper and in his own opinions. The weathercock flew over to the roof of the opposite house, and there it remained. A picture of the darkest wickedness, said the neighbors. The cooper's barrel was hung just under the sign for Ladies' Apparel. The restaurant's menu, which hung in a heavy frame near the door, was placed by the storm just over the entrance to the theater, where nobody ever went. It was a comical program. Horseradish soup and stuffed cabbage, but it made people go in. The furrier's foxskin, which was his respectable sign, was hung on the bell pull of the young man who always went to morning church services, looking like a folded umbrella, strove for the truth, and was a model young man, said his aunt. The sign, Establishment for Higher Education, was moved to the pool hall, and the establishment itself received a board inscribed, Babies Brought Up Here by the Bottle. This wasn't really witty, only naughty, but the storm did it, and we can't control a storm. It was a terrible night, and by morning, just think, nearly every signboard in town had been moved. In some cases, it was done with so much malice that Grandfather wouldn't talk about it, but he laughed inwardly. I could see that, and it is possible he was up to some mischief. The poor inhabitants of the big town, especially those that were not familiar with it, were all mixed up figuring out who was who. They couldn't help it when they judged by the signboards. Some people who thought they were coming to a solemn meeting of the town elders, assembled to discuss highly important matters, found themselves instead in a school full of noisy boys just about to jump over their desks. There were even some people who mistook the church for the theater. And that was really awful. There has never been such a storm in our days. Only Grandfather saw one, and that was when he was a very little boy. Such a storm may never come in our time, but it may in our grandchildren's. And then we must hope and pray that they will keep indoors while the storm shifts the signboards.